order. For the record, my name is Julia Mejia. I'm a city councilor at large, and I'm the chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Education and the sponsor of this docket. I'm also joined by my colleagues. Once they arrive, I will announce them. In accordance to the Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2022, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies from certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public, the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibility while adhering to public health recommendations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed on www.boston.gov/city-council-TV and via broadcast on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and Files 964. We will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Anyone who would like to testify on this matter, please email juan.lopez@boston.gov with your full name for the Zoom link. Today's hearing is on docket 0199, hearing on state receivership for the Boston Public Schools. We are joined by the following panelists. Panel 1 is the administration, which is Drew Echeslon, BPS Deputy Superintendent of Academics, and Farah Azizri, the BPS Deputy Chief of Academic Officer, as well as BPS Senior Director of Data and Accountability, Monica Hogan, who will be here to answer questions. Panel 2 is Professor Domingo Morel, who is a professor at Rutgers Newark, Hareen Chironan, former DESE board member and BPS parent, Suji Scannell, parent at the Hurley School, Ruby Reyes, Executive Director of Boston Education Alliance. And for the record, we also did send out invitations to Superintendent Brenda Casilius and Commissioner Jeff Riley, who sent a letter. I'll now turn it over to my colleagues for opening remarks. And not sure if any of my colleagues are here. Is this Aaron Murphy? I'm not sure if any of my colleagues are here. If any of my colleagues are here. Oh, I see President Council Ed Flynn is here, as well as my co-chair Aaron Murphy, and I see Michael Flaherty is here as well. So in the order of arrival, I'm going to go to D2 Council President Ed Flynn. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for this important hearing on whether or not Boston Public Schools should be under state receivership. So I've been thinking about this subject a lot recently. And, you know, certainly I want to see the mayor responsible for the public schools in Boston, and not someone from the state. We elected the mayor, and a big part of the city budget, a big part of the responsibility is the Boston public school system. The mayor's only been in office several months now. So I think it's important to give the mayor an opportunity to continue the work and to continue the work that she was elected to do by the residents of Boston just several months ago. I'm concerned what impact this will have also as we seek to hire a new superintendent. What impact that will have as we discuss this matter. Having said that, I also am interested in learning why the state is seeking to possibly take over Boston public school system, and what are their reasons, or why are they inclined to do that? What are they seeing that we're not seeing in our investigation of the public school system? Is there something that we feel to do in terms of our investigation that could have addressed this issue a while ago? So I have other comments and other concerns about this, but I'm going to stop there and I'm going to listen to my colleagues and listen to some of the experts as well. But at this time, when we're about to hire a new Boston Public Schools superintendent, is placing this receivership of the Boston Public Schools in receivership. Is that the best answer? Is that what we want to do? I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is supporting our children, supporting our public school kids, especially at this difficult time for them. We need to focus on their mental health. We need to focus on their social, emotional well-being, along with the teachers who play a critical role in families, supporting BPS families as well. There's a lot of work we can do to improve the public school system without bringing a receiver in at this time is my opinion. I'm going to stop there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I'm going to go next to Councillor at Large, Erin Murphy. You now have the floor. And I also wanted to note that we've been joined by District 6 Councillor Lara and District 4 Councillor Worrell. Councillor Murphy, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you to the chair. I'm looking forward to this hearing, learning more about what brought us here and how we're going to get ourselves out of this, right? I'm a Boston public school teacher for over 20 years and a mom who had to corral my kids through the system and know firsthand that many of our schools are not doing what they need to for our children, for our families. Consistent low performance year after year, decades now, and declining enrollment in the BPS schools. It's concerning for me as a resident, as a mom, and now as a former teacher, but as a city councilor. So really looking forward to hearing what your panelists, the panelists here today, right, are going to share, but also continuing our work as a council to see what is best, because at the end of the day, we have to make sure we're advocating and fighting for the children. Every child in the city of Boston deserves a quality, high quality education in an equitable school across the city. We can do it. We have a large budget. We have great teachers. We need the willpower. So I think we can do it. We need to make sure that we're all in it for the right reasons and fighting for the kids and the families in every neighborhood. So thank you and look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. I'm now moving over to Councillor Flaherty at Large. You have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair, for hosting and for sponsoring this hearing. It's clear, obviously, our Boston Public Schools are falling short in providing all of our students, especially our IEP and special ed students with a high quality education. While we continue to see significant declines in enrollment year after year, we also see our per pupil spending increase with minimal impact on those outcomes. I've often talked about the bloat within our system as being the large levels of central office bureaucracy. With that said, I want to stress that I feel strongly that we should spend on our education system. Our children are the future of our city, but I am extremely frustrated by the underperformance year after year after year, as well as the lack of resources and opportunities that some of our students have in the district, despite significant increases in spending. The money has to get to the classroom if we're going to be able to move the dial here. We boast the best colleges and universities in the world, but we're not as boastful with respect to Boston Public Schools system, and we need to be boastful. And we need to do what we need to do to get this back on track. I can say that chronic absenteeism, I can say that chronically underperforming schools, I can say the declining graduation rates, I can say that our student athletes not being able to compete, a couple of schools weren't able to compete this year. That's an embarrassment. That's an absolute embarrassment. And folks need to be held accountable for that. And so I look forward to this discussion today. I look forward to obviously supporting our children and their families. I look forward to supporting our school committee any way that we can. But that said, our track record and the microscope is now on us, and we have some explaining to do as to why year after year after year we're seeing very minimal impact on outcomes when we've been spending a significant amount of money per pupil. And again, money has to get to the classroom for teaching and learning if we're going to have success and we're going to move the dial. So look forward to the testimony today. Appreciate the opportunity, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. I'm moving on next to Councilor Lara, D6. You now have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. And thank you to all of my colleagues and folks from Mcas for being here this morning. I think that we all share one thing on this call, and it's really a vision for a thriving school district in Boston. And I'm here today because I don't believe that state receivership is going to get us any closer to that vision. There has shown to be no clear benefit to BPS or any of the other districts under receivership. In the last decade, the state has taken over 3 school districts across the state, and not only have these districts not shown any significant improvement since the takeover, BPS is currently outperforming every single one of them. In every district, there's been 80% of the students have come from low-income families. Here in Boston, it's 71, but just like all of the other districts, we have a majority Latinx population in our public schools. The timing is of concern to me. Governor Baker is on his way out. We have a new mayor, and in November, almost 80% of the voters in Boston voted to return to an elected school committee. And so why now, when we are moving towards a much more democratic structure in our public schools, are we looking into state receivership? We know that the rating system is flawed. We know that if we are known to be in the bottom 10%, the state requires that, allows at least that we pay twice as much money into charter schools and so on. So, and excuse me, because I'm a little sick. So I'm concerned about state receivership, but I'm also concerned about the timing of state receivership when we should be moving towards more democratically run schools to kind of move to a top-down model. I think what's going to be harmful to our students and our parents and our families. I think Boston's parents, teachers, and students, we're closest to the problem. And therefore, we should be leading and creating the solution. And we have rights to determine our own future and the future of our children. And I think that we should do everything in our power to ensure that state receivership is something that doesn't happen here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. Councilor Worrell, you now have the floor. I see Brian has his hand up. I'm not sure if I'm going to promote you to panelist, Brian, because it doesn't seem like you are. Okay. Councilor Worrell, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we've heard, our BPS, Boston Public Schools, isn't where we want it to be. However, I believe we as a city know our students, our system better than anyone else. So I believe that the solution is here with us. And it's just about getting the resources, being creative and innovative on how we drive the outcomes that we're all looking for as counselors, elected officials, and as parents. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. And I'll just assert my privilege as the chair to just make a few remarks myself. I'm a BPS graduate. And I actually went to, I would say always, every single Boston public school you could imagine, because like many of our students today, back in the day, I bounced from place to place, and I was never in one place long enough to make friends. And I think that the social and emotional and the trauma that a lot of our students are facing today need to be looked into as we start talking about real support services for students. We're always asking our teachers to do more with less. And I think we have an opportunity to really lean into this conversation so that we can address the systemic flaws that have happened here for far too long. And if anyone has followed my education journey, you would know my stance on receivership for BPS is clear. We're not here for it. However, our goal here today is to do two things. The first is to make this conversation accessible and understandable to people who are not often a part of these decision-making processes. Receivership is a complex topic, and it's important for us to be able to break it down in ways that people can understand it. And my hope is that our panelists and my council colleagues will use their time to expand the conversation and get everybody up to speed. The second thing is that I hope that we will do in this hearing is motivate people to activate and get involved. The only way we're going to get anywhere on the topic of receivership is to encourage as many people as possible to lean into this conversation. And in the name of transparency, I also would like to talk a little bit about what receivership is and what it means for BPS. Although I'm sure our panelists will speak more about what's at stake for Boston Public Schools. Receivership over BPS, as was described best in the Bay State banner, calling it an aggressive state intervention, which the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, assumes control of a district, replaces the superintendent, effectively superseding the authority, the mayor, and of the school committee. The move, in effect, takes away local control of our schools. That is what we'll be talking about today. And I am hoping that we will walk away from this hearing with action items to achieve two goals that I mentioned above. And lastly, before turning over this conversation to our panel, I'm hoping to read into the record the letter submitted by Commissioner Riley in case either the administration or the advocates would like to comment on it. And it reads, Dear Chairman Mejia, thank you for your letter dated March 31st, 2022, inviting me to attend a public hearing on the Boston City Council's Committee on Education on April the 11th, 2022. As you know, we have reached the 2-year anniversary of the Memorandum of Agreement between the Boston Public Schools and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. In order to be able to provide a timely and accurate update of the Board of Elementary Secondary Education, BESE, on BPS areas of progress and continued challenges, DESE is in the process of conducting a follow-up district review for BPS. It is my hope that the district review will also provide important information to the new incoming BPS superintendent. The notice that you enclosed states that the subject of April 11th, 2022 hearing will be quote unquote state receivership for the Boston Public Schools. As the Boston Public School District Review is not yet complete, it would be premature for me to appear before the Committee on Education to discuss this topic. And I respectfully decline the invitation to appear before the Committee on Education at this time. So that was the letter that we received from Commissioner Riley. And one last thing that I will say before turning it over to the panel is I was appointed by DESE years ago to be on the accountability task force. And in my role there, I was the only parent, and I think one of the only few people of color in that space advising DESE on accountability measures. And what I said there time and time again is that parents, particularly those who are living the realities and educators who are doing the work, have to have a seat at the table to define for ourselves what a quality education and accountability needs to look like moving forward. And here we are, having this conversation around the Boston Public Schools. And I was in Holyoke in 2015 fighting against the state receivership then, and we already know how that turned out. So I'm looking forward to this conversation and hoping that we can get to a place where we realized that at the end of the day, local control, especially with 99,000 people who voted for an elected school committee, recognize that the city needs more democracy, not more bureaucracy. So I'll now turn over the conversation to our first panel. We will start the hearing presentations from the administration, followed by questions from our counselors, and then we'll hear testimony from our second panel, followed by questions, and we will close with public testimony. I will start with Drew Echelson, and please correct me with the pronunciation of your last name, the BPS Deputy Superintendent of Academics, followed by Farah Azizri, who is the BPS Deputy Chief Academic Officer. Drew, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Mejia and members of the Education Committee. I'm proudly joined this morning here with my colleague, Farah Azaraj, who will be presenting. Farah serves as the Deputy Chief Academic Officer for the Boston Public Schools. I wanted to just acknowledge upfront that Superintendent Casilius couldn't be here this morning. She is undergoing dental surgery. She would much prefer to be here this morning, but unfortunately she couldn't join, but we're honored to be here to engage in this discussion. I just wanted to share a few sort of opening thoughts before we speak for just a few moments to frame this discussion this morning. And I want to begin with this idea that, at least it's my interpretation and belief, that there are two narratives around the Boston Public Schools, and that both of those narratives can be true at the same time. Councillor Flaherty's opening remarks and questions, I think, were really sort of poignant and really resonate with me. The Boston Public Schools must do better. We must improve outcomes and opportunities, particularly for groups of students that the system has marginalized for way too long. We have to do better, and we have to improve outcomes, and we have to accelerate that progress for students. And there are amazing things that are happening across the Boston Public Schools every day, that are practices that are leading the Commonwealth, that are in fact leading the nation in many ways that we'll sort of talk about. And we should be proud of those things. We should acknowledge those things. And at the same time, we have to confront and acknowledge that we must do far better as a system. The story that I think we're going to share today, I think, is clear evidence that the Boston Public Schools has made irrefutable progress over the last 2 years. And we've done that in the face of a public health crisis. Our focus for this morning will share an analysis of the progress that we've made in 6 areas that DESE has decided are important, relevant to this review, as well as to articulate areas where improvement is needed. We'll be honest and transparent, both about the great things that are happening across our system and the evidence and sources of data that suggests progress is being made, as well as the information that demonstrates that we have to do a far better job. We'll also do our best to answer any questions on timeline and process as we understand it. I just want to echo one comment from the commissioner, which I think is a fair assessment, which is that the review is still ongoing. DESE recently concluded their review, and we certainly have been back and forth answering additional questions and making additional employees available for interviews and follow-up questions over the last week. So we'll do our best to answer things as much as we know at this specific moment, and certainly we'll be willing to come back and to proffer additional information as we learn about it in the coming days. I'm going to just quickly share my screen. Our agenda for this morning will be super quick through these slides, but we'll just explain the rationale as we understand it for the district review, communicate the focus for the review, as well as the methodology that DESE used to collect information. We'll share a quick academic analysis of BPS compared to our state and national peers, as well as share some information that we think is relevant to work that has been done in the system over the last 2 years to create conditions of strength, as well as our self-assessment by specific standards and the next steps and timeline. It is our understanding that the commissioner articulated 2 reasons for conducting a review of the Boston Public Schools, which he put in writing to the superintendent. The first, that his board, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, requested an update from the commissioner about the progress of the BPS toward the goals outlined in the MOU. The commissioner felt that in order to present an accurate and fair description of that progress, or where progress was stalled, that he needed to conduct this review to have the best preparation and analysis for that update. The second reason he communicated he wanted to conduct a review was he felt that this review would provide an instructive roadmap for an incoming superintendent. DESE assessed our work in 6 different standards. 1, they took a look at leadership and governance of the system. They looked at curriculum and instruction. They looked at student support, which included outcomes and opportunities for our multilingual learners, our students with disabilities, data and assessment, human resources and professional development, as well as finance and asset management. They submitted to us a set of targeted questions that they would use to sort of govern the types of things that they were interested in looking into under each of those 6 categories. And I've linked that document into the PowerPoint, which I shared with members of your teams. In terms of the methodology that DESE used to try to have a better understanding of the progress BPS has made, there were several different ways that they collected information. 1, they conducted a document review before coming on site. The BPS fully complied with that document review and shared over 590 documents with the department in advance of their arrival to Bowling Building. They conducted focus groups with external partners, families, principals, and other educational advocates throughout the city. They conducted one-on-one interviews with various central office leaders and other officials. And they made observations at 42 schools, a random sample of 42 schools, to collect information about what was happening in Boston Public Schools classrooms. And in preparation for the visit, the Boston Public Schools completed and submitted to DESE a self-assessment at the beginning of the process, as well as at the close of the process, which we've shared with the council in advance of this hearing. Those documents are also linked in this PowerPoint for the review of the public. We think it's important to note that in many ways, we are offering from a position of strength. Over the last 2 years, our school committee, our superintendent, the governance team across the BPS worked to develop and implement a number of key equity-based policies. A health and wellness policy to promote health and wellness for our students across the city, a Mass Core graduation requirement to make more rigorous academic expectations for our students, irrespective of the school that they attend in the BPS, equitable grading policies to ensure that our grading policies across the system are free of bias, as well as overhauling the exam school admissions process to ensure that the demographics of students in our exam schools reflect the rich diversity of our student population. The BPS responded swiftly to COVID-19. We hand-delivered over 20,000 devices to students, hotspots to students. We ensured that our students had access to meals. Our BTU members were extremely amazing partners during this time, ensuring that educators had access to high-quality professional development to support our transition to remote learning during the spring of 2020, as well as during that fall. We have invested in over $100 million in a quality guarantee. These are really important commitments, first made by Mayor Walsh and affirmed by Mayor Janey and Mayor Wu, that ensure that across the system, in academics, in enrichment, in facilities, and in family and community engagement, that our schools have the necessary resources that they need. Our schools now have full-time nurses, full-time family liaisons, full-time psychologists and social workers, high-quality instructional materials that we'll talk about. These are really important foundational conditions that need to be put in place to ensure that BPS students have what they need. And this investment has been huge to help move us in that direction. We also use this time to make major investments in facilities. We've moved more facilities projects in the last 2 years than in BPS's history. We've invested in an air quality monitoring system and dashboard so that people have in real time what the air quality is in each educational space across the entire BPS. We spent $16 million on modernizing and upgrading our water system, an additional $10 million on replacing windows and improving bathrooms across the system, and have conducted what other urban school districts have done across the nation, which is to have a real in-depth, comprehensive facilities condition assessment of each building across the system. This is important because it's providing tools to ensure that as we sort of think about future investments in facilities projects, that we're doing it with the best possible information moving forward. And if anyone has had an opportunity to attend Boston Public School meetings, they know that we are spending a significant amount of time and energy to ensure that we have interpretations and translations set up as part of that engagement process. And while the feedback can sometimes be very difficult, we do open ourselves up for, I think, really important and valuable feedback from our community through things like the community equity roundtables that we host. Let's just situate the Boston Public School performance in the context of where we stand nationally. On the National Assessment of Education Progress, always considered to be the gold standard of assessment systems across the country, Boston Public Schools performed higher over the period of their analysis, 2009, 2019, than what was expected given the demographic characteristics of the district. In fact, the BPS had the highest ranking district effects in 8th grade mathematics and reading of all school districts in their study, and were either leading or were near the top across all urban school districts in reading and math across all grade levels. In their study, Mirrors or Windows, how well do large city public schools overcome the effects of poverty and other barriers, the Council of Great City Schools set in a team in 2019 to study the Boston Public Schools from a qualitative perspective, to look at what decisions the BPS was making to lead the country in its ELA and math outcomes compared to its urban peer districts. Things like high quality curricular materials, high quality rigorous recruitment selection for principals and educators across the system, and a strong teacher core were really noted in the Boston Public School sample. We also think it's important to take into context how the Boston Public Schools performs as compared to its state peers in the Commonwealth. I'll just take one moment to just orient you to this table, which I think is quite instructive and important to this discussion, which looks at how BPS students perform on Mcas compared to their urban peers in the Commonwealth, some of their urban peers in the Commonwealth. And so in the blue rows, you see grades 3 to 8, and in the orange rows, you see grade 10. And if you look at the Boston Public School performance in 2021 compared to many of the other larger urban school districts in the Commonwealth, you'll see that BPS is outperforming most, if not all, in ELA, it's all school districts that are listed on this table. And in fact, is far outperforming the 3 school districts that are currently in receivership, that of Lawrence, Massachusetts, Holyoke, and Southbridge, which are noted here. You also notice that the decline from 2019 to 2021, which was noticed across the entire state, was less significant in the Boston Public Schools than in other urban school districts in the Commonwealth. The same pattern holds true in the area of mathematics and also in grade 10 performance. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Farah Azaraj, who will walk us through our self-assessment that we shared with Desi.
Good morning, Madam Chair Mejia, as well as the Education Committee chairs and all of the counselors, members, and all the counselors with us this morning. Thank you, Dr. Eccleston, for setting the context for the Boston Public Schools. We have shared documentation as well as a narrative in all of the 6 areas, and we want to outline with all of you the evidence of progress in addition to the areas of improvement. We know there are many areas of improvement, as well as Dr. Eccleston's comments earlier mentioned, there are many areas of success that we intend to highlight in order to really make the connection across these 6 indicators that DESE has asked us for review. So in our self-assessment with leadership and governance, our district strategic plan, excuse me, has engaged in our community over 2,100 participants throughout that process with Dr. Casilius's strategic plan outlines the strategic plan outlines the 6 core commitments: eliminating opportunity and achievement gaps, accelerating learning, amplifying all voices, expanding opportunities, cultivating trusts, and activating partnerships. The strategic plan has really moved the district within our internal communication structures, as well as our external communication and support for families, and ensuring that translations and interpretations are not just made available, but they're accessible to all of our community members. So throughout that engagement process, there has been a very strategic focus on the development of equity-based policies, in addition to really shifting how we think of our system in response to the students most in need. Some of the progress that we've made with equity-based policies are under attendance, grade level retention, the Mass Core college and career readiness courses, as well as standards that are outlined by DESE, as well as the policy that has been implemented as of last year through the Boston School Committee. We have also overhauled the admissions to exam schools and working with our community partners and community and families across the Boston Public Schools. And we're ensuring that we're moving towards increasing the biliteracy and a seal of biliteracy opportunities for students who are multilingual learners. And as of late, we are adopting a new equitable grading policy that was communicated to the school committee. So again, we have many focus areas in ensuring that the system responds to the students in an equitable as well as racially equitable for all of our students. The areas of improvement, and certainly one that we are continuing to work towards, is cultivating and maintaining and retaining our school leader, educator, and central office, and really in support of our educators of color, and continuing to improve our internal and external communication within the system and to our broader community members. Next, we've reported on the curriculum and instruction. For our evidence of progress, and I'm going to ask whoever is helping with our slides to just move us to the next slide. We have implemented and began to implement the Mass Core graduation policy this year. We've worked with all of our high schools to align to the state criteria and to really develop universal standards for all students and to be able to graduate meeting all of the Mass Core requirements. In addition to that, we've also supported the school leaders and implemented new guidance counselors for new students who are incoming to 9th grade, as well as in support of the current students in high schools. Our clear district academic priority continues to be equitable literacy and biliteracy for multilingual learners. With that, we've updated our ELA curriculum, as well as materials and professional development, so that educators and school leaders have opportunities to co-learn all of the 5 areas and components of equitable literacy as our academic vision and instructional focus moves into the school implementation next year. The new materials that have been developed from history, social studies, civics, and science are also being developed with or implemented, are implemented with additional time for learning and units that have been developed for acceleration academies, as well as opportunities for tutoring. We've had many students participate in academic mentoring, early childhood tutoring, in addition to a new platform that we've implemented this year for all BPS students, paper education. That is an opportunity for any student who needs support in all the major languages and all languages to have access to that tutoring support 24/7, so that they can have support in writing or a math assignment. And it is available for all students across all of the grades. Our areas of improvement certainly organized in our academic supports to better align with schools' division and structure, and to ensure that there is an accountability for implementation of curriculum. And because we do have many autonomous schools or schools that may be using a variety of curriculum, we are implementing a new process next year using the racial equity planning tool so that schools can identify what curriculum they're using and how it will benefit students most in need. That vetting process will be in conjunction with our academics team, and schools will be provided support and/or guidance in implementation of new curriculum. We'll move into our third area, which is our student support. And this year, we have brought together a dynamic team of over 25 offices across the system to really focus on the multi-tiered system of support, otherwise known as MTSS. And what that really means is that students should be receiving the supports that they need, given where they are academically, with social emotional learning support, behavior support, and the system is a national as well as a state recognized system and framework that we have implemented and began to support our schools in implementation across the district. With that, we want to ensure and focus on the core, which is our tier 1 supports, and make sure that our instruction curriculum at the tier 1 meets the quality indicators for instruction to serve all of our students, in particular our multilingual learners, students with disabilities, and those who are duly identified as multilingual with disabilities. We have made tremendous improvement in reporting on our compliance and meeting our state and Department of Justice agreement with the Boston Public Schools, and ensuring that we've not just identified, but we have hired educators who are qualified to serve our English learners. We have met a tremendous threshold for ESL, which is our ESL is English as a second language licensure requirement in the district, as well as SCI, which is the SCI is the Sheltered English Instruction Endorsement that is a state requirement. Those are required for English learner services, and we're proud of the accomplishments in the development in meeting those compliance areas. And we continue to work with our schools in ensuring that we support them towards maintaining those educators. We are expanding our opportunities for Native heritage language instruction and dual language programs. This is certainly a vision from the superintendent and the Office of English Learners, in which we are looking to expand our supports for all students, but in particular, we've developed a dual language Vietnamese program at the Mather, and this is its first year of inception. Additionally, Cabo Verdean Heritage Program will move and increase into 2 high schools next year, as well as our Chinese SCI Enhanced Program at the Josiah Quincy Elementary School. We look forward to learning from those programs and increasing those opportunities for multilingual learners, students to become biliterate and meet the seal of biliteracy per the state guidelines. And we are expanding, we've expanded opportunities for inclusion at the kindergarten through 8th grade, and we continue to expand those opportunities in addition to leveraging that movement from the elementary inclusion at the secondary level. We recognize this is a huge area of improvement and the disproportionality in special education that is tied to student settings, and ensuring that students are placed in the least restrictive setting, and in particular for students who are also multilingual learners, to ensure that the appropriate settings, as well as academic outcomes and native language support, is being provided. When we move into our 4th area in self-assessment, we are addressing our data and assessment systems. We've made tremendous efforts that have been coordinated from our ODA, Office of Data and Accountability, and our Accountability Department and Division to really coordinate the systems for school staff, in addition to centering students who are in need, especially during this COVID era. So we have implemented the Panorama platform, which is an online system that feeds and sort of houses all of the data for students. And so schools and educators were able to use that platform to develop student success plans on chronic absenteeism, additional supports as needed based on their needs. In addition to that, we've implemented the MAP reading and math assessment as a diagnostic and as a tool for across the district to be able to identify students' progress, as well as use the information and data to indicate where students might be or correlate to the state Mcas assessment. That data has been really beneficial for educators in order to use for instruction, as well as to identify areas of targeted goals in meeting the standards per the state. In addition to the MAP implementation, we've also seen a tremendous increase this year across our schools with students' participation in the fall and winter assessment. And with all of this across the system, we've made tremendous efforts in communication to families, ensuring that our student privacy and data sharing is also protected, and that translation, interpretation, as well as data information is being shared with families, in addition to receiving feedback and input from our families and communities. We still work towards continuing our areas of improvement and integrating the dashboard so that we can have a holistic view and a picture of a student across the data points, as well as at a school level. And that is in conjunction with our multi-tiered system of support, as well as our data and accountability systems, so that schools and classroom teachers can really work with our families and students to identify their goals and to be able to have a dashboard that speaks to all of the data information systems to inform what is the best approach and goals for student outcomes. And with that requires is a lot of training for consistent use of data in order to make sure that we develop training, professional learning around data literacy and knowledge, so that our data systems not only speak to each other, but that we are working across the system to ensure that everyone understands the purpose, intent, and how to leverage and utilize that data for the intended outcomes. We'll move into number 5, which is our human resources and professional development. We acknowledge that, we've made tremendous progress in meeting Judge Garrity's order, as well as cultivating a workforce that reflects the diversity of our students, that includes their racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity. So we're proud of the progress that's been made across the system, in particular for educators from paraprofessionals to teachers to school leaders. And we're proud that 87% of hires over the past 2 years identified as a people of color. Additionally, 53% are fluent in a language other than English, and that educators, where we have 56% of external hires identified as people of color. Those are really important indicators as we work towards our retention programs and services for educators of color, with many pathways, as well as pathways for retention and leadership from the Boston College Lynch program, the Perone Sizer Institute, and others in support of building the capacity and retention of our educators of color. And we have many trainings, supervisor trainings for administrators, again, as well as hiring goals that each school leader must set every year. And so this is the time where our school leaders are setting diversity hiring goals for their school sites and working to ensure that they are meeting the hiring requirements, as well as ensuring that they understand who their makeup of candidates and pool of candidates are, and working with our recruitment, cultivation, and diversity office if they need additional support. So our areas of improvement.
Farah, I know as much as we're a little bit over time, and I just wanted to just be super mindful that we have a long line of colleagues who have questions, and I'm wondering if whether or not some of the questions that they may have could you might have answers to through your presentation. Just wanted to just check in. I'm getting notice here that we are well over time here in this portion.
Absolutely, Councilor Mejia, and I apologize, we did not have a specific time delineated. However, if I could just move to the next slide, I can just share the brief notes, and then I will pass it over to Dr. Eccleston to close us out. And this self-assessment.
Passing it over to Dr. Dr. Drew will not be going to close us out. We're going to go straight to questions. I am the chair of this hearing. No, I'm just joking. I just want to be super mindful of the time.
Absolutely.
So,
I just wanted to make sure we're just about to finish that. If there were any closing remarks from Dr. Eccleston.
Yeah, this is our last slide, Councilor Mejia.
And just quickly, our fiscal year budget is underway, and we've made significant investments in our 4 pillars of the quality and guarantee. Again, we will. There's been an increase of 40 million that's been, at least in terms of proposal to the City Council, that we'll be presenting to you very soon. We do recognize again the facilities in particular, as well as transportation, continue to be great challenges. And again, I want to move it to Dr. Eccleston. It's sake of time to close us out.
okay.
Thank you, Councilor.
Yeah, no worries. So, Drew, I'm going to give you a little bit of grace here, just because normally it's 5 minutes for each speaker, and we're like way over that time. So go ahead if you have any final remarks, so that way I can pass it over to my colleagues for questions.
I'll turn it over to y'all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, and I really do appreciate you all being so thorough with the presentation. It seems to me that we've made many significant gains, and we've actually started pouring resources into the spaces and places that we need. And it really goes to show that in this moment, we need to see what the return on those investments look like before going into a state receivership. I think that people need to pause on that, but that's just me. I'm gonna go over to the question. I'm gonna just let my colleagues know we got 5 minutes, and I'm gonna hold you to that. So I'm gonna start off with Councillor Flynn. You now have the floor, and I'm gonna do a 5 minute for each speaker. So Councillor Flynn, let me set your alarm. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. So my question is, are there any challenges we have that the state is looking at as part of a potential takeover that we're able to address immediately or short or long term and make progress on?
Yeah, I'll start the question, and Farah, if you have anything to add. It seems to me, based on the questions that have been posed to us from our partners at DESE, that they're honing in on a number of different areas that we need to take a close look at in our system. That includes outcomes and opportunities for our students with disabilities in that sort of special education area, facilities, and transportation. Those are areas where I think they have a lot of questions, and we have far more to do as a system. We are moving forward with contract negotiations with our bus drivers union, and some of the things that we're asking for, I think, will help move us in a more positive direction. Certainly can't get into the details of those contract negotiations, but I do think that we're putting in systems and structures to respond to the concerns around on-time transportation. With the support of Mayor Wu and the mayor's office, I think the city is very interested in taking far more responsibility and partnership on the facilities issues that continue to sort of plague the BPS, particularly with decades of deferred maintenance that I think is very problematic and that we need to continue to make progress on. And then third, through our support with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, we have gone through a review of our special education department. They have been very thoughtful in that review and provided us action steps to take. We have been working in concert with them on those, and will continue to make progress in that specific area.
Is the state concerned about public safety issues in our schools, the safety of our students, the safety of our teachers as well? What are they saying about some of these recent incidents about about public safety issues that we're currently dealing with?
I was asked, I'll just speak for myself. I was asked one question that from my perspective, if our schools were safe. I commented on, over the course of the fall and winter, I made observations, I think at like 60 to 70-ish different schools across the BPS. And I saw classrooms in schools that were remarkably safe. I was just speaking for myself though, and I don't know yet where they will come out on findings relative to school safety.
So you're saying, Drew, that the public school system is safe for students and teachers?
That is my set of observations from our schools, yes.
And Counselor,
does the state disagree with you?
I was just going to add, Counselor, that wasn't a particular area of focus for DESE. Certainly, was some level of conversations, but I think Dr. Eccleston just outlined where the key focus was. So we didn't get into what the state thought and what they wanted to engage on there.
Okay, that was an issue that was a concern to me. I was asking a question, just wanted to see what the answer would be. But BPS thinks our schools are safe. I guess that's the answer, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think BPS thinks our schools are safe. We certainly have challenges, like many of our colleagues across the country are right now. We've made significant investments in our safety services team and partnerships with the Boston Police Department. So lots of room to improve, of course. Always welcome the feedback and partnership of the council on this topic.
Thank you.
Is that it, Councilor Flynn?
That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And, as the chair, I'm just going to try to keep things moving as quickly as possible. But I do want to note in regards to public safety is that this concern, we can't expect our schools to be everything to everyone. There is a level of responsibility that I think we need to lean into in terms of community nonprofits, parents, building people's capacity. It should be a shared responsibility when it comes to public safety. And as we continue to go through the budget season, it is my hope that we will be leaning into that conversation and making sure that we are fully resourcing our schools and larger community to support public safety. So, and I do appreciate Councilor Flynn bringing this up, but I'm going to move on to Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Murphy, you now have the floor. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. It's nice to see you, Drew. Again, yes. So I have a few questions. And when I look through the slide deck and I see that you have nice and organized the areas of improvement. And as a former special ed inclusion ESL teacher at an inclusion school, I see that your areas of improvement, you're only really listing disproportionate amount of students in special ed, which I completely agree, academic outcomes for our ESL and disability students, and leverage about inclusion at the secondary level. We know that there are so many underperforming schools and so many of our high school students don't graduate or move on not ready for the workforce. Is there a reason why you left out a lot of the other academic needs across the system for so many of the students? And I mean, the underperforming schools are not just in our inclusion schools, right? And our ESL students are throughout our system. So wondering if there's a reason why we don't have any of those other areas included in your number 3 of your student support for your slide deck.
Yeah, thank you for that important question. I'll do my best to answer it. So what we tried to do in this PowerPoint was to summarize in each of the 6 categories, obviously a much larger document that we shared with you that's about 50 pages that sort of outlines where we see our strengths and challenges. I fully agree that the BPS must do more as a system to ensure that all of our students, particularly students that have been marginalized by our system, have the opportunities to thrive. And I think that's why the Mass Core graduation requirements policy is such a huge deal, that the fact that the superintendent was courageous enough to bring that forward and the school committee's support for this is a game-changing opportunity for our students. It requires in policy that entering into the 7th or 9th grade, that students have a sequence of courses that prepare them for the demands of college and career. And we have also invested at the same time in things that are going to help us achieve that goal. Things like new school counselors at 9th grade that are ensuring that as the policy is enacted for this fall, that our students are starting off in 9th grade, not only with the requisite courses to keep them on track to complete the Mass Core graduation requirements, but there's a plan for them and that plan is being monitored over a 4-year high school career. We also have to make investments, which we've done, to significantly increase the sort of rigor of the traditional academic content areas across the pre-K to grade 6, so that our students are entering into a grade 7 with a much stronger foundation than they have historically. Those are things that we know that we've needed to do. And things like Ed Reports, as you probably know, outline that some of the curricular investments that we've made in the past have not been the right ones to really support our students. And they haven't necessarily started from an expectation of culturally affirming materials that reflect the rich diversity of the BPS. So we think that these types of investments, these policy changes that we're making are really going to create a set of conditions that ensure that our students get to high school far better prepared than they have been in the past, and ensure that our college and career readiness data is moving in the right direction.
May I add just to that comment just quickly that we have also invested in the Essa funding to implement UDL, Universal Design for Learning, across the system, which will be a huge shift across the special education as well as for multilingual learners. We are investing in a special populations team to be able to support students across the system who are multilingual learners, who may be undocumented and or have a disability, and are working with our English Learner Task Force as well as SPEDPAC and the English Learner Task Force with Students with Disabilities Subcommittee on all of those efforts. And so we know there's a greater area of need. And to Dr. Eccleston's point, these are sort of the high level takeaways from the self-assessment, but we certainly have more work to do in this area.
Okay, one more thing. I know Councilor Flynn touched on it, but I feel like the school violence, lack of athletic opportunities, or more equitable opportunities across the board, and the need for more mental health supports, not just a social worker in the schools, or something we are working at on the council here. Something I know as a teacher for over 2 decades, we need more support in. So wondering why those areas were left out, or if you could touch on any of those areas, because those are very important to me. And that's something I know we need to do better in the school system, for families to feel safe, for kids to feel like their school is welcoming, and the mental health supports and athletics all tied together. I think all three, although very separate, are all very connected and needed.
So I'm going to take the liberty. I know, Meg, it seems like you're about to say something. So do you want to say something? Because I'm going to say something as well. So then we're going to move on to the next counselor.
Chairwoman, it's your hearing. So if you want to chime in, I was just going to answer the counselor's question.
Go ahead.
Sure. So I think, Councilor Murphy, you'll see in the budget, we're going to highlight a number of these things that you just spoke about. And I know that those hearings are coming up in April. We have made an increased investment in athletics in particular. And one of the 4 pillars of the quality guarantee really is the enrichment programming. And so this is access to arts and sports and student government and all of those things that we know really enhance the educational experience for students. Yes, it's about academics, of course, but we also know that our students need that social and emotional support as well that they often get through athletics.
Yeah, thank you for that, Meg. And I just want to say again, and for the record, is that this specific hearing is in regards to the receivership and the current MOU. And while I do appreciate my colleagues bringing up the issues of safety and violence, I want to reiterate that a lot of these concerns regarding public safety is a shared responsibility that everyone here in the city of Boston needs to be accountable to. That includes the Boston Public Health Commission, that includes SOAR, that includes the the nonprofit sector, that includes everyone. And so it's a shared responsibility. And I really want to reiterate that this specific hearing is in regards to the receivership and the memo, and making sure that we are able to lean into that conversation. And I will say that again, and I'm hoping that we can keep and Councillor Murphy and Councillor Flynn, you're more than welcome to, if you're interested, is to schedule a hearing in regards to that. I'm already working in that space, hosting a town hall with parents, educators, and students on April the 28th, alongside the co-chair of public safety, Councillor Lara, to look at public safety and the intersection of mental health and wellness for our Boston Public School students. And after that, we will also then be leaning into the conversation. So you're more than welcome to join us in that effort. So I'm going to move on next to Councillor Lara. You now have the floor.
Thank you.
And I see, I'm not sure if
Councillor Flaherty.
it was Councillor
Flaherty is on, Madam Chair.
Yep, got you. Go ahead, Flaherty.
Yeah, I'm on. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. I want to, can someone share special education? How are we building capacity in the system with professionals to better meet the needs of our special education learners? And I guess how would receivership impact those plans? And the second part is, just want to touch on the sort of teacher certification and where are we on that in terms of, are we meeting our goals on that front? What impact, again, would receive in the instance where we've got waivers? Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'll turn over to my colleague Farah to answer the second question around licensures, particularly for our multilingual learners and our Department of Justice agreement. And then I'll take the first question on supports for students with disabilities.
Thank you for the question. I think what we have identified are teachers or educators on emergency licensure across the system and across areas of licensure. Certainly our educators who are educators of color, in addition to teaching students who are multilingual learners and or students who have disabilities, are of highest priority. There has been direct contact from our Office of Human Capital working with those educators. There are ESL as well as special education pathways, as well as mentoring and coaching that is being provided to many educators if they were to register for the pathways programs, and working with our recruitment and cultivation office and diversity, office on those efforts across the special education and the Office of English Learners. In particular to the Office of English Learners, we have met the threshold of over 90% of our English learners receiving ESL with an ESL licensed teacher. That is a huge accomplishment across the system, given the shortage of educators, as we all know this year, and the impact it had that COVID has had on the labor shortage. We are continuing to work across the system to ensure that every educator, as per DESE requirements in the Department of Justice, who is teaching any content, core content, so English language arts, math, science, etc., has the SCI Sheltered English Immersion endorsement. We are right now at 87% across the system of educators who have met that requirement, and they do have a 1 year up until from the hiring up until June 1st in order to meet that requirement to maintain and continue in their positions. So we have communicated to them. I have shared out that information as well to school leaders, and so we are ensuring that every opportunity that exists within the system, as well as communication, is direct to the teachers as well as school leaders on licensure. I will turn it back to Dr. Essen.
And I'll just add to this point, in our most recent last two reports to the Department of Justice, we've reported the highest rated rankings of licensure that we've had in the BPS history since our reporting to the Department of Justice. We, no question, have significant work to do ahead of us around better serving both our multilingual learners and our students with disabilities, but we are making remarkable progress in our reporting of key compliance issues, particularly as it relates to multilingual learners. We have significant work to do as a system around better serving our students with disabilities. I see that in two really key areas. So I'll back into your question around the infrastructure that needs to be put in place to better support our students with disabilities. One, we currently have a compliance issue right now across the system, and there's several reasons for that. One, during COVID, particularly when some of our students, particularly some of our students with the highest priority, were in remote learning, there were a number of services that they weren't able to be provided in a remote setting. And so we have an obligation and a responsibility to work with our families to ensure that students get access to those services that they missed during the time of remote learning. So that's work that we've started. We've started agreements with each one of our families and provided both remote and in-person services that have started to ensure that our students are getting what they need and what they're entitled to. The second issue is around moving some of the sort of evaluations that we need to do, particularly around ensuring that we have more school psychologists to conduct the psychological evaluation that oftentimes is part of an evaluation process. And through the superintendent's leadership, I think it's something like 30 new FTEs and school psychologists. We'll certainly be talking about this in our budget hearings to you. But to have more additional resources to help support that work is really critical. Farah mentioned earlier sort of investment that we're making with our Essa dollars to ensure that our sort of classrooms are designed from a universal design for learning perspective, which means how do we ensure that our students can access the general education curriculum and ensure that the resources that are necessary for students to do that are in place. And we think that through this investment, we will continue to increase the number of students who can access the general education curriculum and increase the number of students who have access to inclusion options, which the research is very clear is the best option whenever possible. And so I think, I do think we have significant work to do. This work is not going to be easy, but we are investing in professional learning and new opportunities for our students that we think will pay dividends down the road.
Is that it, Councilor Clarity?
Yeah.
Do you have any follow-up questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Murphy, I see your hand is raised. So do you want to wait till the second round of questions or because I still have a few more calls?
It's just a follow-up on that. Do we have a breakdown by the district or just, do we have a breakdown by school level or just the district of certified teachers?
I'm sure we could get that information about school level.
I feel like it's only shared district-wide. It would be great to see individual schools by the school. And also any data on the compensatory services.
I'm sorry, Councilor Murphy, just wanted to let you know, and just in terms of the structure is like we go through all of the counselors and then we go back.
I know. I'm just asking what they said about a breakdown of that data they mentioned and also compensatory services. How many?
We can come back to you for another round.
I'll be here.
Thank you. I'm going next to Councilor Lara. 5 minutes, Councilor Lara. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a couple of questions, and thank you so much for all of those questions to my colleagues and to the BPS administration for your answers. So I have three questions for my first round. The first question that I have is that the MOU between DESE and BPS states that BPS will spend the next 3 years working towards the 4 priority areas that they identified. It's only been 2 years since that MOU has been signed. Do you know why DESE called for this urgent review before the agreed upon timeline at the MOU with BPS?
As we understand it, in written communication from the commissioner to the superintendent, he proffered 2 reasons for a review. One, his board, the BESE, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, asked for an update on BPS progress toward the MOU goals and the status of the BPS more broadly. And he felt he needed to commission a review in order to provide the information and data that the board was looking for. That was reason 1. Reason 2 was, given Superintendent Casilius's decision to resign at the end of the school year, he felt that another review would be instructive for an incoming superintendent. So that's what we know in the record to be the rationale for this review.
Great. And so this review seems was presented as to gather information based on the MOU that's already there. And so one of the things that we know is that receivership has to happen within 1 year of a review. And so is this review kind of resetting the clock to that 1 year time from the previous review? Or is this, because it's just an update, not considered an official review that needs to happen within a year before receivership?
I think, Councilor Laura, that would be a better question probably for the commissioner and the Bessie board. I don't think that's probably a question we could answer.
Okay, thank you so much. That's helpful. And I will make this my official request for that information, Chair, if you can ask that question directly so we can get an answer to that.
Will do.
And so the other question that I have is that in the MOU, DESE also states, and so just for some background, we know that private fundraising in BPS has been a big issue. That has ultimately led to inequitable outcomes with the schools because a handful of schools have kind of this ability and the power and the connection and so on and so forth to raise a lot of funds. We have 9 schools who have privately raised somewhere along 10 times more than all of the other BPS schools combined, right? And so we have that data around those numbers. And it looks like DESE and BPS have also come to terms with the fact that this is a problem with BPS. And so in the MOU, it also states that DESE is going to support BPS by brokering partnerships and philanthropic support for schools that don't already have them, right? To kind of like try to balance out this level of private fundraising from the other schools, and also try to push for investment in the transformation schools specifically. So do you know what new partnerships came out of this commitment from DESE and how much more philanthropic investments in dollars went to those other schools?
Dr. Eccleston, I don't know if you might have some information here, but to the best of my knowledge, that work has not been pursued. We can certainly confirm that. I will tell you one thing that the school committee chair and the superintendent have been very interested in, separate from DESE, is an equity-based policy on fundraising. Knowing that some of our schools and some of our families have the ability to fundraise and others don't, we really need to be taking an equitable approach to doing that across the district. So that's something we're looking at doing in addition to a number of the equity-based policies that Dr. Eccleston brought up that we have already completed. We are in the process of doing that research on that policy now.
Yeah, and I'm not aware of any work done in this area to the council's question.
Okay, so I mean, given that in this MOU, it seems like BPS made some commitments, but also DESE made some commitments. And so do we know at all if DESE has maintained their part of this agreement in the last 2 years?
I can start to comment on what area where I have specific evidence of this. You'll notice, and thank you for reading the MOU so carefully, there's an element of the MOU that requires BPS and DESE to collaborate around what the role of school autonomy ought to be across the BPS. Yep. And we have been making progress, meeting the deadlines outlined in that MOU in collaboration with our DESE partners.
And I'll just add, it's not lost on me the irony of when this initial MOU was handed over in March of 2020. I think we all can maybe remember what that timeframe was like. And so in the MOU, both BPS and DESE have made a number of commitments. We do see this as a partnership, and we do appreciate the partnership that has been offered from the state. And we continue to collaborate to figure out exactly what that looks like on a day-to-day.
Great. And so thank you for that example of work that they have. It also says that they would allocate $4 million to 3 schools. Have those $4 million been allocated to BPS by DESE?
Yeah.
It is my understanding that allocation was changed to $2 million and was offered to the district through a grant over the last 2 years.
Thank you.
And was it for the 3? I'm sorry, Chair. I have one final question. Is it okay if I ask it, or I can go in the next round?
Go ahead. Since Aaron did it, might as well be equitable.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My last question is about facilities. And so how can the city council be supportive in facilities upgrades? Like we know that this is like a very concrete area of improvement that's in the MOU. And I know that it requires funding that goes beyond the normal annual BPS budget. So how can the city council be supportive in making sure that that happens?
Council Laura, that is a question that is music to my ears. Thank you for asking that question. I think Chairwoman Mejia has talked about the collective responsibility that we all have with public safety, with educating our children in general, and facilities is certainly a place where this is not just up to BPS alone. BPS is full of phenomenal people, many whom are educators, right? And they have more academic backgrounds rather than operational or facilities backgrounds. So I really see the facilities work. I know the superintendent sees the facility work. I know our current mayor and our past mayors have seen the facilities work as something that is the responsibility of the entire city of Boston. You all approve our budget. You all approve the mayor's capital budget. We have been grateful to Mayor Wu and her team. We have been meeting pretty regularly since she came into office to discuss exactly this, the condition of our buildings. One of the 4 pillars of the quality guarantee that we are pursuing for every single school is major investments in our facilities. We have built, just a handful of schools in the last 50 years, and 80% or more of our buildings were built before World War II. We know that excellent school buildings don't necessarily mean, or the only thing that make the school excellent, but we know that it certainly contributes to a higher quality learning environment for our students. So we want to expedite this work, and we would love the council's support. We're also going to be coming to you shortly. We get a number of dollars from the state. And so we're going to be bringing a couple of projects forward to you for your approval to move forward with those proposals as well. So championing those, advocating for those would be appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Madam Chair. No further questions.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to remind my colleagues again, we're going to do a second round for those who have additional questions. Make sure that you raise your hand so that we can go back for a last round of questions. And the only reason why I'm trying to keep this on track is because we do have a lot of public testimony and we still have to go through another panel. So I just want to be super mindful of the time and really do appreciate my colleagues for keeping to time. I just wanted to also note that we've been joined by Councillor Liz Breeden from District 9. But now I'm going to move on to Councillor Burrell, followed by Councillor Louis Jean, and then Councillor Breeden. So Councillor Burrell, I'm going to start the clock. You now have 5 minutes.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel for presenting. I'll ask my questions all at once. The Panorama platform is used for assessment. Is this used for assessment from K0 to K12? And then is all this information provided to DESE? And what, can you break down to me, like what is it measuring, what Panorama is measuring? And also for our BPS system, is the correct outcome graduation, is it college graduation, or is it career readiness? Yes, and I'll take my questions offline.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. I'll start with the Panorama system. So Panorama is a platform that actually houses different data sets that we have from the system. So for example, we use Aspen, which is our student information systems data warehouse. So that has information on student demographics, their attendance, for example. And so what Panorama does is sort of takes that information, let's use the example on attendance, and it calculates and disaggregates that data to then provide which students fall in the tier 2 chronic absenteeism or tier 3, which is at a higher level of chronic absenteeism. In addition to that, it also houses other data sets from MAP, which is another data set that students, so that's an assessment students take in the fall, winter, and generally, spring, but as the system Panorama, what it does is sort of collects that information. And then our MTSS work group, we have a Office of Data Accountability MTSS team. What they actually do is they take the Panorama, let's say chronic absenteeism data, and they're able to disaggregate that by school level. So they provide monthly reporting to school superintendents, to school leaders. And so that's the way that we're sort of using Panorama at the district. At the school site, Educators, for example, student success teams. So those are the teams that come together from social workers, school psychologists, family liaisons, educators. When students are referred for needing additional services or supports, they use a panorama system to develop a student success plan. And so that could, tie into the chronic absenteeism, for example. That could be an area of need where they need support, or it might be something else around sort of reading supports or not meeting a particular area of standards. So the team comes together and they develop historically. And so we're working to identify how do we leverage panorama across the district outside of just the chronic absenteeism or attendance and student success plans, as it was used during COVID, to really look at this whole child and then be able to identify strategic goals for that student based on their areas of need. So that is the panorama system. And I don't know if Dr. Eggleston, if you want to touch more. I mean, I think the career and college readiness is certainly an area, I think, where we're working with our guidance counselors and career counselors, obviously at the high school level. But I'm going to turn it to Dr. Eggleston to see if there's more that he wants to add in that area.
And I'll just add that we made DESE, I think part of your question was also about, like, is DESE aware of these things? And we made that very clear in our opening and closing statement to DESE, as well as our interviews. In some of the interviews, for example, they wanted demonstration of these tools and resources. And so we showed them the platforms as part of both the interviews and the focus groups that DESE conducted. And then your question, and potentially we can do some additional discussion about this either offline or in a different hearing. But we do think that it is essential that the BPS is preparing all of its students for both the demands of college and career. It's not one or the other, right? It has to be both. And, I think the Mass Core graduation requirements are a really important policy, as I sort of mentioned in the question to Councilor Murphy earlier, to really move our system forward in really important ways around ensuring that our students have access to the types of material and academic programming that prepare them for both. We are also implementing a set of practices with our school leaders that not only create the sort of foundation of the Mass Core graduation requirements, inclusion options at the high school, as well as native language instruction, but also what we call the Core 4, that students across the system need opportunities to have things like AP courses across the BPS, around career options, to do internships and to engage in innovation pathways such as like biomedical sciences, and then have internship options that provide them opportunities to apply their learning from those innovation pathways in real time. And so we can talk a little bit further about at a later date about our strategy around preparing our students for both college and career, but it is very exciting work that I think we're on the precipice of implementing, and we're very excited to get that up off the ground.
A quick question. I know my time is coming to a head. Is Panorama from, what grades does it cover? Is it kindergarten all the way up to K-12? Or?
Yes, sorry, I apologize, I didn't expand on that. So it is K-12. And so it does, again, it's it houses the data that we have on all students across the system in K-12.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Worrell. And I'll just encourage our panelists, because sometimes I know we want to get into the weeds, but it'll just be really important for us also because we're doing interpretation too. So try to speak slower and less. So try to say more in less time and do so as quickly as possible, as brief as possible, not as quickly. So I'm going to go next to Councilor Louis-Jean and then Councilor Breeden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Drew and Vera for being here. She had DESE representation, explain why it should be in receivership of our Boston Public Schools when it itself has not had a track record of improving the outcome and the quality of our schools, especially our schools in urban settings. So I'm happy to have BPS here explaining the progress we've made. Two questions. One is around the support that we're giving to principals to create further stability in our school environments. wanting to hear a bit more about the programming that we're offering and the partnerships. I know that we partner with other schools, such as BC's Lynch School, Leadership Academy, to provide further support and training for our principals. But what are we doing internally? Trainings, programs, space that we're creating for principals and also teachers in that teacher to principal pipeline. Given that, especially in the past 2 years, the stress and the strain of the pandemic on principals and on teachers has been magnified. What is BPS doing to deal with, one, the strengthening stable leadership in our schools, and two, relatedly, especially during the pandemic when we're seeing and experiencing a lot of burnout, which isn't going to help on the improvement front. That's one question. The second question is, Farah, I was really encouraged in your presentation to hear about the strides that BPS has been making in terms of teacher diversity. Oftentimes, though, when you visit some of our schools, you don't really see that happening. And so I know that the Office of Equity used to have sign-off authority on any hires in our schools, and I just like a bit more information around the decision to remove that power from the Office of Equity to really make sure that our schools are doing the work to ensure that we have culturally sensitive, culturally responsive teachers, teachers of color throughout our BPS schools. Thank you.
Great, thank you for those outstanding questions. So I'll take the first one and then turn it over to Farah for the second. As it relates to our support of principals, which I think is really critical, I'll just acknowledge up front that we have less retention that we'd like as a system, although it's no better or worse than sort of the trends that we see nationally or across the state, but it's something that we have to invest a lot of time and energy in moving forward. We do have a significant number of touch points with our principals to ensure that they have the support that they need, and I think we have more work to do there. For example, we have maybe once every 2 weeks, we have a call with principals where we talk about sort of key either operational or academic issues that are important for them to know about, to try to engage them in dialogue. We have a principal cabinet who we consult with around big decisions that we need to make, to get feedback from them and sort of make sure that that we're taking into account principal voice when we're making either policy recommendations or practice decisions across the system, as well as a fairly robust new principal support system that provides high quality professional development from our central office leaders to principals, and also creates a network for them so that they have a group of new principals with whom, some of the challenges that they might experience as new principals is sort of a community of folks for them to sort of work through some of these really important issues with. And that group gets convened once or twice a month with Monica Hall, who leads that team. As well as we have professional development for all principals across the system on academic work once a month. And we really try to hone in on our academic priority of equitable literacy during that time.
And so just a quick follow-up on did you call it a principal center where the principals are able to give feedback on policy changes at BPS level? What is that called?
The principal cabinet.
And how is that systematized? How do you choose which principals participate in the principal cabinet?
Yeah, the principals in each network nominate the principal leaders from their region of who's going to represent that region as part of principal cabinet. So sometimes it's rotating folks. Sometimes people are pretty consistent. I want to say it's 2 or 3 principals per region, and there are 10 regions, but I could be wrong. But that's roughly the number of folks who participate.
That's good to hear, just because I've been, talking to a lot of principals and visiting schools, and they just feel completely shut out from what's happening in central office and from decision making. So I wonder if there's like a difference in the distribution on who's in the cabinet and whether or not those concerns are actually heard versus, maybe we need to do a better job of letting principals know that, especially principals of color, that they can have a say in the policy setting agenda of BPS.
Yeah, and we'll just acknowledge that we have more work to do on the internal communication for sure. Like, I think there are some improvements that have happened, some systems that have been set up, but it's not where it needs to be.
Thank you. And then Farah, were you going to address the teacher, the sign-off authority issue?
Yes, thank you for that question. So I think in previous years, due to Judge Garrity's orders, the Office of Equity was holding, our schools, obviously school leaders accountable to that process. It has shifted to the schools division, in which the school superintendents and the chief of schools, for Corey Harris, for example, has communicated this. We actually held a training or meeting, I should say, with all of our school leaders just 2 weeks ago. And it's a joint effort between the schools division, Office of English Learners, Special Education, certainly the recruitment, Office of Recruitment, Diversity and Cultivation is leading that effort. And so each principal school leader, they just work with their teams, especially the hiring committee at the school site, using the superintendent's circular, and they develop a hiring goal for diversity at their school site. And they work with their school superintendents to ensure that they're meeting that hiring diversity goal. In addition to that, the Recruitment, Cultivation, and Diversity Office is also identifying particular schools to support the work of meeting those goals, in addition to looking at the makeup of students and the composition of educators and targeting specifically around linguistic diversity and or racial diversity. So there's a targeted initiative for particular schools, ensuring that candidates are identified for those schools. I hope that answers the question, but please feel free to.
Just to sum it up, I just want to sum it up. Basically, we're intervening at the beginning of the process rather than having equity check it at the end. So we're making sure that folks help us with recruitment and retention, being very intentional about our outreach. And that's where equity has shifted its focus versus just signing off at the end.
Yeah, I get that. And so especially in the desk report, when they talk about culturally, responsive educators, I just think when we had that more centralized, even if we do consider it out the back end, we were seeing more teachers coming into the pipeline. And so I just want to throw out there probably more thought in terms of like where in the processes do we want to have check-ins on ensuring that our schools are meeting the task of hiring diverse educators.
For sure. And we actually have a presentation that we did to the school committee several weeks ago. So we'll send that your way so you can see the latest numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jean. I also just want to be super mindful. Like, I know that some folks, we still have a lot of folks who are signed up for public testimony. We still have another panel to get through. And so I just want to be super mindful and keeping the conversation moving. So Councilor Louis-Jean, I'm going to move on to, I see that Councilor Breeden is no longer with us. So unfortunately she had to leave. So I'm going to move on. I do have a few questions, and now I'm just mindful of the time. I'm just going to ask one, and I'll just come back at another time for others. I'm just curious, what are we communicating to families and teachers in the community at large, in terms of what's being considered at the state level? I'm not hearing a lot of this out in the streets, right? Like people, we're in the weeds of it, but like if you go to a laundromat or if you go to a hair salon, nobody has ever heard that this is even a possibility. So I'm just curious about what that communication has looked like. And which leads me to the next point, and it's not just so much a question, more just something for us to be super mindful of, is always the same usual suspects that are at the Bessie meeting. I testified there alongside the mayor and BPS and BTU folks. But it just seems like we need to do a better job at building a stronger coalition to making sure that we're sounding the alarm and that we're bringing in more families into these conversations. So I just kind of want to note that level of engagement is definitely something that I think we can increase our capacity in. So if you could just talk to me really briefly about what are we doing to communicate to families, students, teachers, and the community at large about what is being considered on the state level.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairwoman Mejia, for that question. I think it's really important to remember that we're in the middle of this review process, right? And so, DESE has come in, they've done the initial review, and they're now in the process of writing that draft report. And I see us all as having different roles to play, right? The City Council, our partners at the union, my colleagues here at the central office, at the school level, right? Everybody has a different role to play in what that review actually looks like, and making sure we're telling the story of what we have done. We haven't sent any direct communication to families specifically about about, the possibility of receivership or even the review itself. We did send communications to our staff, and we, as Dr. Eccleston pointed out, we did share the introductory, I think it's 46 or 47 pages, and then the closing statement that really outlines the case that we think we've made as part of this review, and that's a public document, so anybody can view that and can see what we've done. The superintendent has also provided numerous updates to the school committee at our public meetings, so for families who tune in there and staff that tune in there, they can also get the latest.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to go in the interest of time, because we still have public testimony and another panel. I'm just going to yield the rest of my time. I'm going to move on to public testimony. We have a few. I'm just going to do this a little bit out of order. So I'm just going to do the first three. We have Jonathan Guzman, Jessica Tang, and Peter Pisa. So I'm going to start off with Jonathan Guzman. You now have the floor. Assuming that Jonathan has been let in.
Madam Chair, this is Candace. We did promote Mr. Guzman to panelist, but he may have to just accept it in order to move over.
Okay, Jonathan, so I just sent you the request, so please, I'm gonna go to Jessica Tang, and then Jonathan, you'll just have to jump in when you get in here. So Jessica Tang, you now have the floor.
Hi, good morning, or almost afternoon. I thought there was a panel before us, but
yeah, we're moving things out of order just in the interest of getting some folks, because we have testimony.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and go. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Tang, and I'm proud to serve as the president of the Boston Teachers Union, representing 8,500 in-service educators and additional 3,000 retired educators, many who returned as substitute teachers this year to help address the educator shortage. And I'm here today because educators on the ground are increasingly concerned about the actions regarding DESE, particularly regarding the second audit. And we are concerned for several reasons. One, it is another DESE-initiated disruption that upended teachers' plans leading up to Mcas. And Mcas was actually postponed in the 42 schools mentioned as a result of the audit. And we have still not gotten an explanation of why it couldn't wait until after Mcas and what the timeline for the decisions will be, which too further contributes to a climate of fear and anxiety that the end game here is DESE receivership, or we call them disempowerment zones, or interventions of any other sort. And so to be clear, we believe that receivership or placement in disempowerment zone cannot and shouldn't be part of any DESE or BESE conversation if the goal is truly to support Boston Public Schools. And third, receivership and state intervention has been ineffective, anti-democratic, and honestly, a racist policy, if you look at the data, and based on its track record to date, would cause harm to BPS students, families, and educators. What we need is stable leadership, consistent evidence-based policies, adequate staffing, sustained resources to fund them, and educational solutions that come from our educators, families, and students. And we will be sharing with the council a 9-page document summarizing the data and failures of state intervention and the state accountability system. We know our schools need improvements, to be clear, and that's why we're fighting for solutions in our master contract. Solutions like high quality programs, inclusion done right, access to counselors and social workers. State interventions have no track record of improving these things, and instead, throughout this pandemic, the guidance and supports from DESE have often come too little, too late, or actively undermined ongoing efforts, including a disastrous test to stay and pool surveillance testing program that our nurses have much to say about. Nurses that we, again, negotiated in a contract and wouldn't have had prior to the pandemic had we not done that. However, today, I am here to elevate the voices of educators and parents on the ground who couldn't be here to speak this morning and want to yield most of my time to share some of their words. Many of them are working or have worked in schools currently under receivership, including in Lawrence and other districts, and I strongly believe that their perspective is among the most valuable in this conversation. So, for example, Elizabeth South, who's a K2 SEI teacher, shares that in the past, she's had to work under administrations that receive intense pressure from outside sources to boost test scores and metrics, and to meet the demands of think tanks and corporations that weren't accountable to the public with intense government intervention. What was the result? She shares that she felt frazzled and insecure, and she couldn't be as patient with her students because it felt like every mistake was going to have incredibly lethal consequences. She couldn't produce creative solutions to address their learning needs because her brain was spinning from the top down threats and demands, and didn't feel like she could bring joy into the classroom. She wrote, quote, "None of these top-down interventions changed academic outcomes for children. Research tells us that what kids need are safe, joyful learning environments, access to teachers who can be emotionally available and nurturing to them, strong community bonds and stabilities. That is how we cultivate excellence and promote educational justice." And she shares furthermore why receivership would create conditions that would actually make it harder for teachers like Elizabeth to be there for her students. Anna Royal, also BPS parent, taught at the Dever when it was put into receivership. She writes, "When DESE came to our school to talk about possible receivership, they created a team of teachers, community members, and members from DESE to look at the information they had compiled and make a final decision on whether or not to place the Dever into receivership. Unfortunately, the data being studied was Mcas scores and reading levels that was problematic because they were a dual language program. Spanish was not properly being considered. The data in Spanish was not being properly considered, nor was the fact that students in dual language programs showed dip in growth before demonstrating growth that surpasses bilingual students in other programs, as well as their monolingual peers." Wow, was that the timer already?
Oh yeah, I gave you a little bit of extra time, but guess what? I'm doing things a little bit unconventional here, Jessica. So I'm going to allow both Jonathan and Peter to do some remarks, and then I'm going to ask my colleagues to ask you all any brief questions. So you were not prepared to do that, but we think that given the work that you've been doing in this space, that I think it's important for you to be able to utilize this platform to answer any specific questions my colleagues may have if they raise their hand. So
okay, yeah, that's fine. I just have 3 or more for testimonies, which maybe I can email instead.
Right.
But just wanted to share them and have some other comments, but I'll wait. Thank you.
And if you could send them to us via email, we'll make sure that they get recorded into the record.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go next to Jonathan. Is Jonathan here?
I am.
Okay, great. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
I just want to know the
morning.
2 minutes, okay? I just want to make sure because I'm doing things out of order and out of unconventional here. So 2 minutes, okay?
Okay. Well, good morning, Boston City Council. My name is Jonathan Guzman. I'm the Vice Chair of the Lawrence School Committee, and I'm here to urge you, right, to oppose the idea of receivership and everybody that is out there. Rather than allowing Bessie to take away the right of Bostonians to run their schools, they should listen to their concerns about the support and resources students, families, and educators say they need to be successful. You as a legislative branch should be listening to the community, and you're doing it right now, supporting Boston's right to a democratically elected school committee to help your schools and students get where they need to go. The state receivership status established in 2010 is the root of the problem. Those in power in 2010 should be embarrassed for enabling such discriminatory legislation to pass, and those in power now should be ashamed for failing to advocate for the repeal of the receivership law. Don't stay silent, or you also be complicit. Those who engage in and support this process should be embarrassed as well, since in Massachusetts, Black and Latinx neighborhoods are being targeted with this severe receivership laws that deprive your neighbors of the right to a local elected body that support the needs of the people. Why does Bessie believe that a takeover will save our education system when they have been in charge of Lawrence Public Schools for 10 years and they have failed our district? My generation, the next generation of leaders recognize the danger. We must respect communities of colors and accept that we understand our children's need better than outsiders who have failed to deliver on promises in school districts like Lawrence. They have pushed aside frontline professionals who have committed their life to education, and they have harmed both students and teacher voice and rights as a result. They have taken away the right for which many people throughout history have shed blood or died, so that someone like me can have a voice to speak for my community and the right to vote on an elected school committee. Why is this a reason behind this Boston receivership? Many people have noticed that Bessie has been pressing for state control on a political power of people of color has grown in Boston. The drive comes after an overwhelming majority of Bostonians voted in support of an elected school committee. And I want you to show leadership today in publicly opposing this unproductive, anti-democratic, and racist takeover. And I encourage you to do so today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for being here and thank you for your support. I'm going to go next to Peter. You now have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Chair Mejia, and to the Education Committee for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Peter Piazza. I'm a researcher at the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Education Assessment. I'll be speaking out against an empowerment zone model for Boston Public Schools. In a previous role, I visited schools in the Springfield Empowerment Zone Partnership for 3 years, from 2015 to 2018, leading interviews with district and school level stakeholders as part of a state contracted evaluation of the Empowerment Zone schools in Springfield. I also reviewed their improvement plans every year, and I was the lead writer on annual reports on their progress. Based on that experience, I feel the Empowerment Zone model is simply a bad idea for Boston. In Springfield, state partnership has reduced student learning to test preparation, and 7 years later, it has offered no evidence of success. Of course, all schools under state oversight face intense pressure to raise Mcas scores. In my experience in Springfield, that pressure, combined with flexibility in the Empowerment Zone model, led to a number of unproven experiments that, in my opinion, were ultimately harmful for students. Here are a few examples. One middle school had double blocks of math and ELA all 3 years, but only 2 years of science and just 1 year of social studies. Another middle school extended the school day to make room for tested subjects, but cut theater, art, and all foreign language. At another school, every math class all year was taught by a computer program. The math teacher merely monitored the room and helped individual students with problems every day for the entire school year. If I had more time, I'd have more examples. Although the focus on test preparation clearly affected all students, the impact was most troubling for special education students. As it was implemented in Springfield, programs favored by leaders in the charter sector now had entry into traditional public schools through the flexibility in the Empowerment Zone model. However, because charter schools generally do not serve students with moderate or severe special needs, leaders now found themselves in charge, sometimes for the first time ever, of the learning experiences of vulnerable students with complex needs. Of course, the treatment of special education students is a focal point in DESE's second review of BPS. In my time as an evaluator in Springfield, I did not see a promising model for special education. Instead, leaders created barriers to mainstreaming and used discipline in place of socio-emotional support. I think I'm out of time, so I'll stop there.
Yes, you are. Sorry, Peter. I don't mean to rush you off, but we're doing things unconventionally here, so I just want to be super mindful.
No worries.
Because we didn't originally plan to have you all speak and be available for questions. I'm not going to go in the order of counselors. If any of the counselors have any specific questions for any of the panelists, the public testimony folks that just spoke, please raise your hand and I will call on you. And if my colleagues don't, I don't see any hands up, so I'm gonna give that time to Jessica to quickly, and I'm gonna put you on a timer, okay? Ruth C has one question, and then Jessica, if you could just, when it's your turn, just kind of like speed it up. Okay, yep. Ruth C, go ahead. Councilor Louisiane.
Sorry, Jessica, but just a real quick question. I really appreciate the commentary from the brother, from Lawrence, who talked about the failure of DESE receivership there. Just want to know if he can talk a little bit more about it, because DESE often points to Lawrence as an example of potential success. So if you could just expound a little bit more around what DESE receivership has looked like in Lawrence, I'd appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Sure, happy to. And if Jonathan is still there and wants to weigh in too, he can certainly feel free to do so. But essentially, there was a slight uptick, but even, if you look at the data, they have to acknowledge that that uptick has actually decreased. And if you look at the three metrics that DESE uses, even for receivership and the state accountability system, so using their own metrics, Boston actually does better than all three of the districts under their receivership. And mind you also that receivership has been happening for over 10 years in some of these places, and they're doing worse than Boston is still. And not a single district or school has come out of receivership. And so that's why we are very concerned. And if you look at the two schools in Boston, which is the Dever School and the Holland School, which is where a lot of these testimonies I was going to share come from, they just haven't worked. At the Dever, they had 5 different school leaders and receivers in 7 years. They have a hard time retaining teachers. And as educators, we know that sustainability, the relationships with students and families is critical to student success. And so, those were some of the things that we wanted to share was that they have a very poor track record, and what they did in Lawrence is actually not working in respect to, if you just look at the data and comparing the data to Boston. So did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you, Jessica. And if Jonathan's around, I'd love to hear from him too. I know you said you were going to send a 9-pager to us, but if you could include that information, I think that would be helpful to help, really push back against any claim that receivership has been successful, either in another school district or here at the Dever, where I have teachers really struggling. Teachers are really struggling under receivership and have been. So I just appreciate those data points.
Yep, absolutely.
So Jonathan, if you don't mind, if you have any other insights to share, and then I see Councilor Lara has her hand up, and then Jessica, for each question that you have, that's one less testimony that you're going to be able to read on the record.
That's fine. That's fine. I can summarize them.
Okay.
I can just quickly add, councilors. Thank you so much. Well, at least in our experience, since Lawrence Public Schools were put into receivership in 2011, we have seen a decline, and currently back in the bottom 6% of the district. And this is according to DESE's data. And what we're noticing is that our district is mostly moving into this, factor of improving scores on the Mcas, and the standardized test is ignoring the development and experience differences in students, right? And what it does is that pushes teachers in particular to do this whole concept of memorization to our students, because the opportunity to facilitate, giving them the opportunity to facilitate personalized, deeper learning experience for our student, it's not being acceptable to this takeover dictatorship. And in particular, even what is happening in Lawrence is that it's usually one individual that is the receiver, but we have an actual board. And even themselves don't understand if they have power because they have an MOA. And the particular law is so broad that allows DESE to define what a definition is. And that is really scary. And we have seen the stuff that they could do to a district like ours.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go next to Councilor Lara.
Thank you, Chair. I think that for me, maybe it's less of a question and more of a comment. It's just about the pathway out of receivership. I think it's something that Jessica Tang mentioned, is that there is no clear pathway out of receivership. We have seen, not just in the state, but all across the country, schools that have been stuck under receivership for decades. Even just most recently in Paterson, New Jersey, where they were 30 years under receivership, and everybody who voted in support of it has found themselves, apologizing because of the failure. And so, if wanting to take this moment to kind of ring that alarm that there is no pathway out of receivership that is being presented to BPS, and that if we fall into it, we could be looking at generations of under receivership and under this kind of failure that we've seen from DESE for once they take over school districts.
Thank you, Councilor Ladd. I really do appreciate your remarks there. I know, Jessica, I'm going to give you, I'm going to say 54 seconds. Now, go ahead, wrap it up so I can go.
That's fine. I'll just share excerpts. So, Ana Arroyo was there at the Dever, and there's no longer a dual language program. They've had no significant progress, and that is a school that's been under state receivership. Cheryl Robinson, another teacher at the Dever, what she says is, what receivership means to me is a stigmatizing label that scares families into the halls of Boston's Catholic schools. The turn of students and teachers turning over and sifting through the community rather than building it up. Too many high-priced managers squandering monies that could be directed to reparations level child-facing staff increases, resources spent on oversight and consulting that could otherwise be designated to balance the playing field for students remaining rather than lining the pockets of already those who are privileged, punishment, teacher blaming, and burnout. Layla Parks was a founding teacher, a special education teacher at the Holland, again, one of the other receiver schools in the district, and essentially basically says that, there are teachers and administrators across Boston already doing their absolute best, working against tremendous odds. And students need more than just literacy and math skills. They also need things like glasses, toothbrushes, social emotional supports. And that's why, top-down mandates rarely solve issues, because nobody can tell you everything each student needs, because each school is unique. So we're advocating for hub community schools in Boston Public Schools, which is the wraparound supports and services. And that's what she says is needed most, is if you want to help Boston Public Schools, don't waste your time on top-down interventions or empowerment zones that don't have a great record. School closings and receivership just don't work. It's better time and money would be spent engaging in individual school communities to determine what interventions they already know they need. And just ask. And then there also was a mention earlier about, there's a narrative that, BPS is a failing district and that, but we have the best universities. And I just have to push back on the narrative. While there absolutely does need to be improvement in BPS, particularly around special education and multilingual learners, let's be honest here too, that BPS also, despite its failings, is one of the better urban districts in the nation. And there's a lot that people are doing right too. And we have to build upon the expertise in the district. There's also a false narrative that we don't, that we spend too much money, right? But if you actually look at the data again, it's in the middle of the road. So, Boston spends about 37% over the foundation budget. In contrast, Newton spends 70% over, Brookline spends 83% over, and Cambridge spends 135% over. The average is 31. So we're about with the average. And it doesn't account for the funding that BPS has to fund for private parochial and charter schools for special education, transportation costs, et cetera. So bottom line, thank you for this hearing. Thank you for hearing us out. And we hope that every city councilor will join us in fighting unhelpful interventions or empowerment zones and fight for what we do need as students, families, and educators, because we have solutions and we just need your support. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I really do appreciate my colleagues for allowing this unconventional series of questions that came in. And I know that Councilor Murphy, I'm not sure if you have any additional questions that you'd like to ask specifically to the first panel before we move on. I know I did say that I would do a second round, and I want to just honor that, and curious if any of my colleagues have any other questions for the first panelist before we move on to the next panel. No, seeing no hands, I'm going to move on. Thank you to our first panel and to the members of the public. If you're able to stick around, please do so. We'll be moving on now. We're going to be starting in the following order with Domingo Burrell, who's the professor at Rutgers Newark, excuse me. Hareen here now, former DESE board member and BPS parent, and Suji Skellel, parent at the Hurley School, and Ruby Reyes. And I just want to be super mindful. We are slated to end at 1, and we still have public testimony to go. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to stick to the 5-minute mark. As much as we want to go on and on and on, we just need to be super mindful of this. And we also want to just remind that our parents, Suhei is using an interpreter. So we want to be super mindful of making sure that we are speaking slow. Okay, including myself. So I'm going to go on to Professor Morel. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for inviting me to be part of this important hearing, important conversation. So I know that there are a lot of other individuals that need to speak, so I'll try to make this brief. So my name is Domingo Morel. I am an associate professor of political science at Rutgers University in Newark, and I'm the author of the book Takeover: Race, Education, and American Democracy. And so in listening to what Councilor Mejia and others have been saying, I'm just taking a couple of notes. And what I heard is that what is of importance to the counselors and members of the community is the improvement of education, the importance of citizens to have a right and the say of what happens in their schools, right? And that's why, as Councilor Mejia mentioned, 99,000 Bostonians voted in support of having an elected board. I also heard about increasing parental engagement. I heard about concerns with public school, BPS declining enrollments. I heard about the importance of social emotional support services, right? The importance of hiring, supporting, and retaining teachers of color, and questions about safety, and the importance of making sure that the schools are safe, and that the path to that involves community organizations and other entities within the city of Boston, right? And so if these are the kind of things that the community is concerned with, and I don't think that there'll be any disagreement with this, then state takeover of the local schools is not going to provide any solutions to this, because what the research says, and we have over 30 years of evidence on state takeovers of local school districts, that these concerns will not be addressed, because state takeovers are not about connecting the community to their schools. They're about separating the community from their schools. So in terms of social emotional learning, hiring and supporting teachers of color, improving educational outcomes, having citizen participation in the schools and at the school district level, all of these things actually decline as a result of a state takeover of local schools. And so in addition to that, while the evidence shows that these are the things that are not likely to happen, that the opposite is likely to happen, we do have evidence that this is a policy that is targeted specifically at communities of color, and particularly communities of color who are being led by people of color. And so as Boston transitions into having more people of color lead the city, this is a policy that we've seen across the country over 30 years is consistent with this with this dynamic, right? That as communities of color increasingly have leaders of color, that takeover becomes a policy option for states, right? And so I'll leave it at that. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. But I think this is an important hearing for the city of Boston. So thank you, Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, Professor, for always showing up for Boston. We so much appreciate you and your voice and leadership in this space. I'm going to go next to Hareen Chironau. And please, Hareen, correct me and school me on the last name here. I know you're the former DESE board member.
No problem.
How is it?
Good morning, Chairperson Mejia, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Hareen Chironau, and I live in Jamaica Plain with my wife and 2 kids. I'm a BPS parent and a member of the parent group Quest. For 11 years, I was a member and vice chair for many of those of the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. And in 2011, I voted to put the Lawrence Public Schools into receivership. And I'm here to tell you I was wrong. It was a difficult time for Lawrence schools. The former superintendent was indicted for fraud and embezzlement. The mayor was navigating multiple recall efforts and had called upon the commissioner to take over the schools. The level of dysfunction was overwhelming. So with no other options, I joined my BESE colleagues to vote in favor of a state takeover. My hesitation was not without good reason. I was not a supporter of DESE's label and punish school accountability system that replaces local control with an external receiver and uses Mcas scores as the key indicator to define school quality. When board members asked how long the receivership would last, the commissioner suggested we were looking at no less than 4 or 5 years. Well, it's been 10 years, and using DESE's own metrics, Lawrence families are no closer to the schools they deserve than they were in 2011. Lawrence ranked 16th from the bottom of all Massachusetts districts with no clear path forward. I was also on the board when DESE took over 2 Boston public schools, the Dever and Holland that we heard about from Jessica. And even though in those cases, public outcry was to retain local control, DESE still intervened, and we've seen the results in terms of teacher turnover, student turnover, and a reduction in enrollment. We know that district receivership has been harmful now by looking back at what's happened in Massachusetts over the past few years. We look at school stability. Even though teacher turnover across the state has been flat for the past 13 years, in takeover districts, we see a huge increase in turnover starting with the year of the takeover. In terms of teacher experience as well, we see experienced teachers leaving receiver districts. They don't come, they don't stay, because the top-down decision-making and lack of local control are not a draw. In terms of resources, many people think that with a receivership, there will be additional resources. There are no substantial or sustained resources to address the challenges that our districts face just because a receiver has taken over the district or school. The receiver is empowered to restructure the existing budget, but the state does not come with additional resources to add to the coffers. And the final thing I wanted to mention is, which is really important, is the impact on students. It's not something we typically talk about. The BESE student rep, who has an actual vote on the state board, which is a conversation for another hearing perhaps, they reported on their student experience once their schools or districts have been labeled failing or underperforming, and what we heard was not good. Students reported being taunted by other schools when attending athletic events or competitions. They doubted their own academic work. They were no longer sure how to assess their experience and all that they had contributed, and they were unsure about college, wondering how their applications would be reviewed coming from a failing school. These concerns, along with the fact that it is mostly Black and brown and low-income students who are in takeover districts and schools, should raise red flags for all of us about the top-down intervention. And when we think of Boston's segregated high schools, we know which communities will suffer the most from these labels. I was wrong in my Lawrence vote, but right in my fears. Increasing the role of administrators and the state while decreasing the role of educators and the community is not the way to improve schools. We just voted to take back local control with an all-elected school committee. This takes us in the opposite direction. The Board of Elementary and Secondary Ed has 11 appointed members, and except for the parent, the student, and the labor rep, they are 100% accountable to the governor for their appointment and under constant pressure to support the commissioner's agenda. The Boston City Council voice is critical to ensuring that our school district does not end up in the DESE receivership quagmire that the previous 3 districts find themselves in. We've had a combined 25 years of DESE takeover efforts in smaller districts without achieving the results we desired. Why would anyone think that the state is somehow equipped to do in our city, the largest district in the state, what they have failed to do anywhere else? Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for that powerful testimony. We have a lot to learn in that. And I hope that DESE sits and listens to this recording and put it on replay. Because there's a lot that we can learn from what we just heard here right now. I'm gonna go to next, Suhey. Lo dije bien, mi amor. Lo estoy diciendo bien. Tu nombre.
Hola. Buenos días. Sí, lo dijo bien. Buen día, concejal Mejía.
Ay, un placer de verte. Y quiero dejar, I'm gonna let everyone know that we're gonna be using an interpreter for this testimony. So te voy a dar piso. Estoy totalmente agradecida que estás aquí para levantar tu voz. Y bueno, ya tú sabes.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Buenos días, concejal Mejía. Gracias por la oportunidad. Gracias a todos los miembros del panel y a todas las autoridades de DESI. Gracias por permitirme que me exprese, ya que me inscribí para compartir mi testimonio en la reunión de DESI del pasado 22 de marzo y me rechazaron como padre y como persona que necesitaba interpretación. Basada en mi experiencia con DESI, comparto mi testimonio aquí porque pienso que sería la manera que pueden escucharse a los padres, a los estudiantes que son aprendices del idioma inglés como yo. Mi nombre es Sujei Escanel, vivo en el vecindario de Rosendale, soy una inmigrante de nacionalidad dominicana, madre de 3 niños, uno de ellos estudia en la escuela bilingüe Hurley de Boston Public School. Soy una miembro activa de mi comunidad. Por este motivo me encuentro aquí ante ustedes para compartirle parte de mi historia y la relación que mantengo con BPS. La primera vez que fui al distrito escolar de Boston es una experiencia inolvidable, pues la persona que me atendió me hizo sentir tanta confianza a la vez de ayudarme y aconsejarme sobre la importancia de la educación de mis hijos, además de alentarme a creer en esta gran nación, en especial en el maravilloso estado de Massachusetts, y en particular en su educación. El nombre de esa persona es Juana Infante. Como madre inmigrante, puedo testificar que una de las principales razones que nos impulsan a salir de nuestro país, de nuestra zona de confort, a alejarnos de nuestras familias y amigos, es la educación de nuestros hijos. Queremos que se formen capaces y competitivos en un mundo de constante cambio. También es la educación una herramienta elemental para cumplir el gran sueño americano. Basada en lo antes expuesto, no estoy de acuerdo con la intervención del Estado o Receivership para las escuelas públicas de Boston, ya que tenemos un sistema escolar que funciona. Como todo en la vida, no es perfecto, pero trabaja. Y si algo podemos hacer es unir fuerza para juntos hacer que funcione de la manera más óptima posible. Si algo de valor está roto, lo correcto es repararlo para que vuelva a tener la utilidad que necesitamos. No es válido tirarlo o botarlo a la basura. Hemos visto que donde el Estado ha intervenido, los índices académicos no han mejorado consistentemente. Las relaciones entre maestros y estudiantes han empeorado y ha sido más difícil mantener a los maestros con mucha experiencia y conocimiento de la comunidad. En fin, ha sido más nociva la supuesta medicina que la propia enfermedad. Entendemos que el objetivo principal de DESI es contribuir al buen funcionamiento del sistema escolar, pero la mejor manera de DESI apoyar a las escuelas, a sus estudiantes, a los maestros y al personal que allí labora, es aumentando presupuesto, actualizando infraestructura que muchas no están acorde con los tiempos y el momento que vivimos pospandémico, ampliando el currículum, apoyando actividades físicas y extracurriculares, entre otras que se determinan haciendo evaluaciones individuales. Sin olvidar que estamos atravesando una crisis sanitaria debido a COVID-19. Boston posee excelentes universidades, tiene incomparables hospitales, además de un extraordinario capital humano. También podemos tener las mejores escuelas públicas. Las soluciones las tenemos nosotros, los miembros de la comunidad, las escuelas, las familias, los maestros que juntos hacemos un gran equipo. Lo último que necesitamos es la inestabilidad que viene con las intervenciones del Estado, como es el receivership. Gracias por la oportunidad de expresarme y por abogar por mis amadas escuelas de Boston. Dios bendiga a Boston y al resto del mundo. Gracias, concejal. Y también por último quiero decir que la primera vez que después de ir a BPS fui a Parent University, que estaba usted dando un taller, concejal Mejía. Y gracias por la oportunidad y que tenga un excelente resto del día.
Gracias, gracias.
I'm going to go ahead and interpret. Is that okay?
Sure. I thought we were listening on the other channel, but go ahead. Yes.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you for letting me be here. I tried to go to DESI on March 22nd, they did not let me express myself because they did not have interpretation services for me when I was there. So they rejected me. They rejected to listen to the voice of the parent. I am a parent. I'm also an English language learner. My name is Suye. I live in Rosendale. I'm from the Dominican Republic. I have 3 kids. One of them goes to the Hurley BPS. I'm an active member here in the Boston Public Schools. I'm involved in, I can't forget one of the experiences that I had before when I went to BPS. And one person gave me the trust and talked to me about the importance of education with our children. And she helped me to believe in the education here in Massachusetts. And her name is Juana. And she instilled in me and pushed me to help my kids because I come from another country. I came from another country and got out of my comfort zone. And that helped me to continue and achieve the American dream. So I want to say that the education at BPS works. It's not perfect like anything else, but if we can join forces together, I think we can make this work. We cannot just dispose of something that's already broken. Instead, we should try to fix it. Because yes, we do need a lot of improvement in academics and other things, but this is possible. So I feel like when Desi comes in as an intervention now with the receivership, I think the medicine will be worse than the disease, and instead the schools will be worse. So instead, we should try to support this with better budgets and to improvements in the school sites. And need to improve our curriculum, especially now that we are trying to come out of this post-pandemic situation. I think that Boston has best university, best schools, and BPS has also best schools. So we're here to help each other. And lastly, I just want to say that I did meet Councilor Mejia and one of the parents university. Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you. Wow, yo estoy súper emocionada porque sinceramente a oír nuestro lenguaje en un hearing públicamente es algo bien importante. Yo siempre hablo que yo vine aquí a este país, tuve que aprender a hablar inglés. Mi mamá ni terminó el 3er grado, no sabía ni leer ni escribir, ni en inglés ni en español. Y cuando nosotros pensamos que los padres de los padres tienen que abogar, por alguna vez no tienen la capacidad o no entienden el sistema americano, hay muchas cosas que yo creo que se abusan el sistema de nuestra gente. So, Sujei, estoy súper emocionada de verte aquí como líder, hablando y abogando para los derechos de los padres inmigrantes, los padres que el inglés no es su primer lenguaje. Es bien importante que nosotros nos demos cuenta que tenemos que cambiar la manera, como quien dice, hacemos negocio aquí en la ciudad de Boston. So, gracias por estar aquí y traer tu voz y compartirla con nosotros. Estoy bien orgullosa. Y yo también soy dominicana, so ya tú sabes. Súper orgullosa de ti. I'm not going to translate that. I was just really quick. I was just saying how incredibly powerful it is to create space for Latino parents and immigrant parents to speak in their native language, to be fully expressed. You know, I often talk about the fact that I came to this country, learned how to speak English. My mom did not even make it beyond 3rd grade, struggled with reading and writing even in her native language. A lot of folks come to this country and don't understand the education system or how to navigate it. And it's so beautiful and so powerful to see Suhey here speaking and being fully expressed in her native language. It goes to show that we need to really do more to create space for people to be native speakers and advocate for their children. So thank you for that. And I'm gonna go next to, last but not least, the one and only Ruby Reyes. You have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Councilor Mejia and and your office for putting this hearing together. I'm the director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance, and I'm here to address the ongoing bullying of the Boston public schools with threats of state takeover in the form of receivership or empowerment zones. The results of DESE's receivership across the state have been chronically underperforming. In Lawrence, Southbridge, Holyoke, and our own BPS schools of the Devon and Up Holland. Southbridge, Holyoke, and Springfield are the lowest, second lowest, and third lowest ranked districts in the state, respectively. Lawrence was the 17th lowest in the state. These districts began their receivership between 2011 and 2016. This means that DESE has had time to provide support and make improvements, but clearly has not. The most recent addition to DESE's failed receivership experiments is the Springfield Empowerment Zone, which by DESE's own standards of Mcas scores has very little data to prove its effectiveness. Like a corporate shell game, the schools in the zone have closed, reopened, changed names, reconfigured, and gone from 11 to 14 to 17 to 16. How is this creating stability? DESE created the zone in 2014 to accelerate student achievement in the city of Springfield's most underperforming schools. What data is available for the empowerment zone is that one of the schools is an exam school, similar to our own, with extensive admissions requirements. 9 of the schools in the zone had 2019 data available that showed 7 of the 9 schools remain in the state's lowest 5th percentile. Duggan is the non-exam school, now in the lowest, which is also not in the lowest 5th percentile. It is also located in the wealthier white neighborhood of Springfield called 16 Acres, which is 62% non-Hispanic white. DESE's empowerment zone does not have the data to show their effectiveness. DESE continues to tout the zone despite the low rankings by DESE's own standards. This calls into question the credibility of the state's district accountability system and how it is used to judge, label, and justify intervention in districts that are made up of majority people of color. Please do not let this happen in Boston. In Boston, DESE's failed receivership experiments are at the Devon and Up Holland. The Holland was put under receivership in 2013. In 2014, the Up Academy Charter Management Company received national attention for suspending more kindergartners than any other school in Massachusetts. This is the receiver chosen by DESE and who remains in place at the Holland. The Up Holland is considered chronically underperforming 8 years later by DESE's own standards. The Devon was placed under receivership in 2014. Prior to the receivership, the Devon was majority Latino students. 37% of the teachers were Latino and had one of the few dual language programs in BPS. The Devon now has no dual language program, and the 37% of Latino teachers has turned to 15. 7 years later, the school remains chronically underperforming by DESE's own standards. Instead of supporting Boston after an overwhelming majority of voters demanded an elected school committee, or supporting Boston as it searches for a new superintendent, or even offering resources to support special education in Boston, the state makes a power grab. Student and parent leadership should be fostered and supported, rather than what is happening now in bullying and overt threats, like Commissioner Riley threatening in the Globe to temporarily withhold Essa funds from BPS. DESE's takeovers target communities of color. Black and Latino communities should not be used for another state experiment. Commissioner Riley is not even here today to explain to our community why he thinks the state has the capacity to do better. Beja asks our city council to sign a resolution against receivership and state control in any form. The record of DESE state takeovers has literally helped no one and continues to cause harm and damage. Please help us stop this before it happens in Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. Really do appreciate your testimony, and I think call to action. with all of my colleagues. I wanted to just be super mindful. It's 12:30 and we have probably like 12 people signed up for testimony. I know that Councilor Lara, you're still with us, so I'm going to open it to you for questions.
Thank you so much, Chair. I don't think that I have any specific questions for this panel.
Okay, thank you. So I have two and potentially three, but just very similar to the question that I asked the first panel. Could you talk a little bit about what can we do as a city to help build a coalition of people to speak out against receivership for BPS? Would love to hear what more we could be doing. And then obviously later today, I'll just ask my other question. We're gonna be having a hearing on the elected school committee. And I was wondering whether or not any of you here, each of you, could talk a little bit about how these two issues are tied together.
I can say that for the Boston Education Justice Alliance, on our behalf, our ask is that the City Council sign a resolution adamantly opposing receivership in any form. We're anticipating that probably the move that DESE will make is to put a group of schools into an empowerment zone. So opposing that, and also working actively to fight to return the Dever and the Up Holland to the Boston Public Schools. I think those are our major asks of advocacy and support in this work. Suhey went to the DESE board meeting and was turned away in her testimony. So you can kind of see the role that families are not having in decision-making already. We fight so hard for our families to be involved in decision-making that receivership is not the answer. And Herneen, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the elected school committee.
Sure, I can say something. I see Domingo has come on too. I think, you know, the big change with the receivership for most of these districts is that the elected school committee exists, but it no longer has any authority or power or structured input into the entire future of the district. So what we've seen in all the districts right now that where the state took over is that the school committee continues to exist, but they don't play a role in the daily functioning of the schools and connecting the community to the school, in having input in over any part of the school, who's hired, how the schools are structured. This receiver has total authority in this state through the 2010 Act for restructuring the school district. They can look at the schedule, they can look at the curriculum, they can look at the enrollment, they can look at the school size, they can look at they can look at every single thing basically that goes on in those districts, and the school committee does not have a role. Although they mentioned that there's a board now, a receiver board in Lawrence. I think the school committee member referenced that. The board is still run, you know, has a person who's running, and that is not the elected school committee. The elected school committee sits on the side. So the idea of building any kind of community engagement is gone in these models. And in Boston, you know, here we are in this moment, or on the cusp of this major transition and a very exciting change. We had, you know, the highest voter turnout ever for a ballot question in favor of an elected school committee, where, you know, you're having a hearing this afternoon. It's very exciting. Everyone's lining up for this major transition. And yet the state at this moment says, hey, no, we don't think you're capable. We don't think you're competent. We don't think, you know, a district that has a high percentage of people of color should be able to control its own destiny. We're going to take it and we're going to do what we think should happen at the state level. That is how they operate. You know, it's how they operate on the schools they take over, and it's how they operate on the district. So, you know, what is the timing? I don't know. It started before you know, we lost our superintendent in this whole transition, but it's of major concern that this is when our commissioner decides to really drill down. And I thought the answer to the question was interesting from the BPS about why now that Councilor Lara asked, they had 4 years, why 2 years? You know, the board asks questions to the commissioner that the commissioner wants to be asked. It's like a circular process. It's not like anything happens in a vacuum. So if he's interested in finding out what's going on in Boston, then the board is interested in finding out. It's it's an integrated unit. So that's just want to say about that.
Thank you.
Domingo, did you want to speak? I'm sorry.
I just want to add real quickly to the question about strategizing. And so obviously Boston and you all have done a wonderful job of community organizing to get this elected school board measure on the ballot and getting the majority of voters to support it. And so what I would encourage you to continue doing is, in addition to that, to organizing with other cities across the state. So obviously you had Jonathan Guzman, he had testified today. And so teaming up with Lawrence, teaming up with Holyoke, right? And so these other cities who are going through similar experiences to get their state legislators to support you, right? So this has to be beyond Boston, it has to be a statewide issue. And even to the extent that you can involve members of your congressional delegation to support you as well. So all your leverage points, right? Utilize them for this cause, not only for Boston, but for other cities who are experiencing the same types of experiences.
Thank you for that, Domingo. You know, having been to DESE as a parent and bringing other parents, some who were undocumented, I was really taken back by the fact that you have to have a state ID, a federal ID, just to be able to step foot inside that building. So there are some systemic barriers that prevent families even to be able to, let alone not even speak, but just to walk in. And I think that that's something that we need to also look at in terms of removing those barriers for real family voice, because I found that to be offensive and also a bit intimidating to folks who want to participate, but can't because they don't have the proper identification. I think that that's something that I want to just uplift as something for us to be super mindful of. So, hey, te voy a hacer una pregunta a ti específicamente. Me gustaría saber, en tu opinión, qué nosotros podemos hacer para asegurarnos que los padres, específicamente los padres que vienen de otros países, entiendan sus derechos y entiendan cómo se pueden activar en esta conversación.
Okay, so the question, do you want to do the question in English also, or you want me to interpret that?
Oh, go ahead. You do such a great job. Go ahead.
So the question for Suye is, as a parent coming from another country, what should we be doing to get the parents involved?
Oh, gracias, disculpe, concejal, que se fue la señal, no escuché que dijo mi nombre. La respuesta, pienso que sería involucrar la comunidad, trabajar, esa formación de los padres, enseñarle a perder el miedo. Nosotros hemos estado, yo trabajo organizando padres para San Steven también, y hemos estado abogando para que los padres a entender su rol. Nosotros tenemos la materia prima de las escuelas, que son los estudiantes. Entonces, cuando escuchamos que educamos los padres ya saben, se involucran. Yo soy una madre que pasé también, como el primer testimonio que yo escuché fue un testimonio suyo, cuando usted habló cómo usted llegó, que su mamá no hablaba inglés, que no estaba alfabetizada tampoco. Entonces, ese tipo de cosas te hacen creer que tú puedes triunfar en esta nación. Mire dónde está usted, hija de una inmigrante. Prácticamente, como usted dijo, analfabeta en su propio idioma. Entonces, si nosotros involucramos la comunidad, por ejemplo, cómo yo me sentí a pesar de estar legal en este país, cuando Desi no me dejó hablar, yo no me sentí bien, yo me sentí triste también, porque yo no pude, usted habló Mayor Hood ese día, habló usted y luego habló Jessica. Jessica me dio 30 segundos de su tiempo. Entonces, si no hay una igualdad, si no se involucra la comunidad, si no nos dejan a los padres formar parte de las decisiones, no creo que se pueda llevar a cabo un buen trabajo. Gracias.
So yes, how to involve parents to help them lose fear, to organize. I also work at the St. Stephen's organization. I'm a parent advocate. We do have the students. There are students that are ready to get educated, but we need to have the parents to get educated and to get involved. For example, my experience when I heard you actually, Counselor Chair to Julia Mejia, I heard your testimony when you share that you were an immigrant. You share about your mother. Your mother was not only did not speak English, but the fact that she was illiterate in her native language. I think that when I heard that, that inspired me that you can overcome barriers and you can achieve things. Look at yourself now. And for example, with Desi, even though I have a legal status myself, the fact that they rejected me, they did, as a parent, they did not allow me to speak. You know, Jessica Teng were there, you were there, the mayor was there, and thanks to Jessica Teng, she gave me 30 seconds of her own time so that I was able to participate.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You know, I'm going to, obviously, you know, we have a lot of folks who are really interested in participating in this conversation. And I want to move on to public testimony, but I wanted to just really quickly thank our second panel for bringing so much of yourself into the space. And not just sharing your truth, but really your experience and a lot of really great insight to how things work or don't work in the best interest of our community. So I'm going to move on. For the record, again, the subject of this hearing order specifically is around the receivership for BPS. And we have Sharon Hinton, Lisa Green, Michael Hitchman, Sarah Horsley, Maria Mejia, Gina Carmen, Catherine Vitale, Doris McGee signed up. But if there are other folks who are interested in speaking, please make sure that you send us an email at julia.mejia@boston.gov. You can also sign up for testimony with, according to Central Staff last check-in. You basically would just need to email them. We're asking everyone to keep their testimony to 2 minutes. And then we also have a few folks who have not signed up for public testimony, but you are in the waiting room. It's Maria Ural, George Mendoza, Kristen Landry, Stephanie Baños, Jenna Russo, Rafaela Polanco, and Shana. That's who I have signed up. So I'm going to go first to move on to Sharon Hinton. Everybody has 2 minutes. So thank you again to our panelists. You're more than welcome to stay or listen in at a later date, but your voice was deeply appreciated. I'm going to go now to public testimony. Sharon Hinton, you now have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm Sharon Hinton, founder and executive director of Black Teachers Matter, a former BPS student, former BPS employee, mother of BPS graduate, and educator and Hyde Park homeowner. I'm also one of the 99,000 Bostonians who voted in favor of the non-binding referendum to return to an elected school committee. I thank everyone for their testimony. I'm an educator and I'm a lifelong learner. So I learned a lot today in terms of what's really at stake, even though I knew what's really at stake, because this is happening in Boston. Just as a history lesson, Governor Edward Everett established in 1837, the second oldest state of the Board of Education in the United States, 1837. And this is the first public school. Horace Mann became the Secretary of Education, the first state board of education, and he didn't have any formal learning, but he went to Brown University, and yet he's still called the father of American public schools. But he didn't have a formal education. What he did have was a white man who owned property. We are sitting in the situation in 2022. Again, Professor Morell, thank you so much for your historical reference. The fact that we are still sitting in a colonialized, racist, inherently racist educational institution that thinks at two different pinnacles in education that there's an institution that can come in here from the top and tell people of color at pivotal points when Black people actually were the head of the Boston School Committee in 1991, the city took over. And then now we have a situation in 2022 where the state thinks they can take over. But we've also had 99,000 people say, as people of color overwhelmingly, but across the districts, across everyone saying, we want control of our schools. And Boston, which is the largest, the capital city and the largest city, we don't have the people here with more educational institutions per square mile and hospitals than any place else in the globe. We don't have enough educated people here that can decide who's going to run the school system. And DESE clearly does not have a track record that says this. If this was a job application, you'd have to show a track record. You'd have to show that you can do the job. Clearly, DESE has shown. Thank you, Sister Harneen Chernow. Thank you for all the people that have said you don't have the track record currently or in the previous history to say that you can do this. My question, because I have a lot of stuff and I'll submit it in writing. I'll also be attending the elected versus appointed school committee. What are we going to do about it? If 99,000 people in Boston can't say this is what we want, and Sister Harneen said that DESE will come in and take over all the decision-making, and we already have an issue with parents not having a voice, students not having a voice, teachers not having a voice. Again, we have a coalition of color that says we can do this, and we've got other people stemming back to 1637 that says, with the same mentality that we don't have that, what can we do about this to make sure that this does not happen, that this takeover does not happen? Thank you.
Thank you. This is what's the most challenging in being the chair of a hearing like this, because there's so many important points that need to be said. But I do want to be super mindful of the fact that we do have a hard stop at 1. We may need to go a little bit over, obviously, because we still have some folks who have to speak. And I know that Lisa's asking for a little bit of extra time. So you're gonna have to speak really fast because you're not gonna get that extra time because we still have a whole bunch of other folks that need to go after you, my love. So, so Lisa, in the spirit of just making sure that everybody has a voice in this platform, I'm giving you 2 minutes, okay? Start. And you're on mute. And you're on mute. I'm going to reset you because you just messed that up, Lisa. Ready? 1, 2, 3. You now have the floor. You ready to go? Get your life together, Lisa, because I can't hear you. I'm going to skip you and come back to you. Okay. Connect your situation here. Okay, I'm going to go next to Michael. Michael, you have 2 minutes and you have the floor. Michael, going once, or am I on mute? I can't hear nobody. Michael?
Counselor, he's currently in the waiting room and he was just moved into the panelists.
Okay, so I'm gonna go next to Sarah. I'm hoping that all of our testimonies have been brought over to panelists.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I'm here, Mike Heichman.
Okay, Mike, you got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mike Heichman, Dorchester, Beja. I call on the City Council to pass a resolution opposing the threat of further hostile takeovers of our schools and any future bullying by Commissioner Jeffrey Riley and DESE. Many of us in Boston love all of our children and believe that every child deserves a high-quality education. We must acknowledge that our school system has major problems and we must take responsibility and do much better. However, DESE has been a major part of our problem. Our city has been a high needs district and the state has never provided us with sufficient funds. Since 1993, they have cursed us with Mcas, the Massachusetts child abuse system. This discriminatory system is designed to ensure that children who attend wealthy white schools in the suburbs look like they are doing an excellent job, while communities like ours are guaranteed to do poorly. We are then judged to have failed, punitive actions are taken against our children, and hostile actions are taken against schools that they designate as low performing. The victim is blamed and punished. Why are our test scores so low? Because we have insufficient resources and poor facilities. because for over 2 years now, Corona has hurt communities like Boston more severely than the wealthier communities because of poverty and racism. Look at the declining test scores, JR screams. He blames the victim and ignores the underlying reasons caused by DESE's policies and practices. The pressure from DESE for the school system to immediately raise our test scores or else is abusive and racist. DESE has recently invaded our schools to continue their harassment. Never mind that the pandemic continues. Never mind that Mayor Wu just fired our superintendent. We must defend our children against destructive miseducational DESE policies and practices. We must resist ongoing and future threats of hostile takeover. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Thank you.
Yes, great job, Mike. Everyone should model Mike's behavior here. 2 minutes. Great job. I'm going next to, I believe, Lisa. Are you ready? Are you good? Lisa. Going once, going twice. Okay, Lisa, we'll come back to you. I'm going next to Sarah. Sarah, you now have the floor, then followed by Maria, then Gina, then Catherine, then Dolores. So make sure that those folks are waiting in the queue. Okay, Sarah, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Mejia. My name is Sarah Horsley. I live in Jamaica Plain. I'm a parent of a third grader in BPS. I'm also the co-founder of BPS Families for COVID Safety, a group of families with children or grandchildren in BPS who advocate for improvement to COVID safety in the schools. Other speakers have talked about so many reasons why state takeover of BPS would harm students and communities. And I would like to offer another way that DESE or the state being in control of BPS would be more harmful, and that is in COVID safety and response. As families, we've been deeply disappointed and angered by how the state has dealt with COVID safety in schools. First, DESE has relied on data and medical advisors from wealthier, whiter suburban districts where, for example, most schools have HVAC and higher vaccination rates. Second, DESE required all districts to use an opt-in COVID testing model, even though other large urban districts like Los Angeles achieve much higher participation in testing by using an opt-out model. Third, DESE has been too rigid on remote learning, not allowing districts like BPS to decide when a school or a district needs to pivot to remote to control COVID outbreaks or surges, such as we had at the Curley and other schools in the fall. Fourth, when the state ended its school mask requirement, they ignored huge inequities in vaccination rates between communities. So for the younger group 5 to 11-year-olds, Boston is now about 40% vaccinated, where districts like Wellesley, Newton, Concord, are at 70% or above. And then finally, DESE's engagement with families is wholly inadequate and disrespectful. As Suhey, Scannell, and others mentioned, their board meetings are accessible only in person, as Councilor Mejia mentioned, with an ID, and only in English. And also, as Councilor Mejia noted earlier, families must have a seat at the table to ensure accountability and equitable education. So of course, BPS has room for improvement, but these top-down punitive state interventions that wrest control from us, the local community, is not the answer. So we want to ask the City Council to unanimously oppose receivership or empowerment zone in any form. And also, like Ruby mentioned, return the Dever and the Holland also to BPS control. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so very much. I'm going to move on next to Maria, then Catherine, then Dolores, and Vatsity, Natalia, and Gina. I understand that you have yet to respond to promote to panelists, so make sure that you do. Okay, so I'm moving on to Maria Mejia. María.
Hola, ya es de tarde porque ya pasan del mediodía. Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es María Mejía. Vivo en la comunidad de Roseberry y tengo un niño en la escuela Blaston. Como madre me siento muy orgullosa de la escuela de mi hijo. Soy parte del consejo de la escuela. Mi hijo tiene un IP, tiene un excelente progreso en la escuela por el apoyo que tiene. Sus maestros están haciendo un excelente trabajo Entonces, yo pregunto, ¿por qué decir que BPS no está haciendo su trabajo? Las escuelas públicas de Boston necesitan apoyo, recursos y estabilidad, mayores inversiones y una gobernabilidad democrática, no a la administración estatal, no. ¿Por qué decir con un simple examen de Mcas evaluar la capacidad de un niño? No es así, no. Ese es el día a día con el maestro. Y como madre me siento aterrorizada de que mi hijo pierda esa ayuda que tanto necesita y que haga un retroceso como va. No es justo hacerles estos a nuestros niños, nuestras escuelas y la comunidad. En este momento siento como madre voz y voto a la educación de mi hijo y no quiero que eso cambie para nada. DESI o DESE tiene un historial terrible en resultados de administración judicial, zonas de empoderamiento. Esto se debe a que reemplazan el liderazgo, cambian el personal y se enfocan en un simple puntuaje de Mcas que no tiene aporte. No aportan recursos económicos adicionales y eso es lo que necesitamos en Boston, no una toma de control estatal. Yo espero que nuestras súplicas sean escogidas como madre también. Y concejal Mejía, yo pienso que usted es mi familia, porque creo que es de la misma ciudad.
Ay, Dios mío.
Muy feliz con usted. Gracias. Pasen el resto de la tarde. Gracias.
Gracias. Ay, Dios mío, me están reclamando la familia aquí. Somos familia. Eso a mí me gusta. Ay, Dios mío. Cada vez que oigo mi lenguaje aquí en esta conversación me da una emoción tremenda. Okay, ahora...
Can I interpret?
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Yes.
So I am a parent from Roxbury. I'm also part of the council. My son has EAP, and my son has a lot of support from her teachers. And this is a good example. And now my question is, why does the state want to take over BPS? BPS is doing a good job. It is providing the needed support that children have. And the state just wants to focus on the MCAS results. And that shouldn't be the main point, because students need more support the day-to-day, the relationship with their teachers. And now I'm terrified that my son will lose the support that he's been getting. I don't think this is fair. I think what we need is the financial support, and also we need to include the voice and vote of the parents. So DESI has a terrible record regarding receivership, because when they will come in, they will replace the leadership, they will replace the staff, and they will focus most on the MCAS results. But we should not allow the state to do this.
Gracias. Thank you. Hey, I just wanted to just check in with Lisa Green to see if your audio and visual situation is under control.
Can you hear me? I'm going to do it from my phone, I think. Can you hear that?
Yes, we can. The floor is yours.
Okay, let me undo my camera too. Sorry. Start video. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Find my testimony. Sorry. Okay, so thanks so much to Councilor Mejia for convening this hearing, and to the councilors and panelists who are here today. My name's Lisa Green, and I'm here on behalf of Bostonians for an Elected School Committee. We're a coalition of 15 organizations who campaigned for the successful result on ballot question 3 this past November, when more than 99,000 voters demanded the restoration of an elected school committee in Boston. We collectively represent thousands of your constituents in the following organizations: Black Educators Alliance of Mass, Black Teachers Matter, Boston Coalition for Education Equity, Boston Education Justice Alliance, the BTU, Citizens for Public Schools, C-Plan, Jamaica Plain Progressives, Mass Alliance, Mass Asian American Educators Association, Mi Gente Boston, Progressive West Rocks, Roslindale, and Quest. Question 3 resonated with voters because local control is the cornerstone of American public education. As Professor Morell has written, across the U.S. and throughout the past several decades, we've seen the community's right to vote is often attacked in maneuvers such as mayoral takeovers, like the one that installed the appointed school committee in Boston in 1991, and through state receivership, as is now being threatened by DESE. These are ultimately both forms of takeover ripped from the same playbook, designed to remove the power of the local community to exercise influence over how their children are educated, especially in districts that are majority communities of color. The residents of Boston were stripped of our rights to elect our own decision makers on our school committee in 1991. And now that 79% have voted to demand our voting rights back, the state is intervening with another plan of attack to keep us disenfranchised. Both of these assaults on community control serve the same purpose, and both should be rejected by our elected representatives. They're the same, and we've seen it happen before. Just as happened 30 years ago, just as Black and Brown communities have amassed enough political power to regain a say in the governance of Boston's public schools, schools where their children are the vast majority of students being educated, the State Department of Education is predictably swooping in to take that power away again. And again, the only constituencies who have seemed to support this receivership maneuver so far are the same handful of special interest groups who engineered the mayoral takeover in 91 that gave us the appointed school committee. Organizations like the Pioneer Institute, the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, and others we've seen reprising their roles this year. We can't let them win. Just a few short months ago, voters in every precinct and every ward in Boston demanded a return to local democratic control of our schools. We want decision makers who are truly accountable to the residents of Boston, who by design of the electoral process are close enough to the needs of our communities because they need our votes. Voters in every precinct that elected all of you resoundingly rejected out of touch, unaccountable appointees. It's an insult to the voters of Boston for DESE to now suggest using receivership to forcibly impose decision makers who are even further removed and even less accountable. I urge the mayor, the city council, and the Boston State House delegation to act now, to do everything in their power to reject state receivership and restore a fully elected school committee. And I respectfully remind all of you that of the inconsistency of rejecting receivership while supporting its sister tactic of retaining and appointed decision makers on school committee. Even in a hybrid model, the voters of Boston should not have the power of their votes watered down. We should have the right to elect our own decision makers on school committee, just like every other municipality in Mass. If you agree, visit our website at electthebsc.org, where you'll find info on how to sign up on the final public hearing on the home rule petition to elect an elected school committee this afternoon, and other ways that you can fight to honor our undeniable mandate for an elected school committee that such a huge majority of Boston voters delivered to our elected representatives in November. Okay. Thank you.
And you still took your extra time. I just want you to let you know that putting that on the record.
You can give me the hook, ring the bell next time. Sorry.
I'm going to yell at you later. All right. So I just want to be super mindful. We still have, thank you for that. We still have Catherine, Natal, Dolores, McGee, Vassity, and Natalia and Gina. We still have a few more folks. So I'm going to go now to Catherine, if you are ready.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, it's Vitali. So I first want to say that all the hearings I've attended over the past 2 years, this one has been more of a conversation than a hearing, which is detrimental to the process because some people had more speaking time than others, and some may not have had the chance to be heard. Regarding the proposed state receivership over Boston Public Schools, as a lifelong resident of Dorchester and a product of Boston Public Schools myself, I think it's painfully clear that the city council and the school committee do not do enough to make sure parents are involved in decision making. It's not typical of me to agree with the stance of the city council on any issue, but it's clear that the Boston Public Schools have a lot of work to do to get to where they need to be, and state receivership is not the answer. The past 2 years should not be considered in this decision, as many school districts across the country are struggling because of the pandemic. It's interesting that DESE is suggesting this change now after we have voted for an elected school committee. They're using the same argument that they used back in the 90s when they tricked us into an appointed committee. The state and city seem to be doing whatever they can to keep their control over our schools and keep parents out of the decision making. I strongly oppose this receivership and also want to add that I have attempted to speak at least 6 DESE board meetings over the past year, and I've gotten declined every time. When DESE offers public comments, they pre-select who's allowed to speak, and that's a huge problem that should also be addressed. That's all.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm so glad that even though it took us a while to get to you, that you were able to, at the very least here in our hearing, had an opportunity to voice, and anything that I'm hosting. I know it feels a little bit more of a conversation. So I am trying to do my best to ensure that we create space for people to be fully expressed, but I'm gonna continue to encourage folks to stay to time, including myself. So thank you for that feedback. I'm gonna go next to Dolores. You have 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much. I would like to take this opportunity to express my strong opposition to state receivership. I cannot imagine a time when I would be in favor of state receivership, but the timing of one now is distinctly bad. First of all, assessment of academic performance across the district must take into consideration the unprecedented impact that the response to COVID has had over the last 2 years. Now is not the time to propose such a dramatic shift in oversight, as current performance across the district is intrinsically linked to the COVID response. Recovering from a widespread and multifaceted academic loss of this nature will take time, as well as more influence from the local community, not less. Parents and community members are the original, most consistent, and longest standing stakeholders in students' education. The last 2 years have illuminated like never before just how important it is for parents to have visibility into their child's school day and curriculum content. Second of all, Bostonians recently voted in favor of an elected school committee. State receivership would completely undermine the will of the people as it functionally removes local influence and control. Now is not the time, and state receivership is not the answer. Boston students deserve leadership that is directly invested in their success by people who know and care about them. Outsourcing their education to faraway and disconnected entities is the exact opposite of what our children need after everything they've been through. I'd like to finish my testimony by raising a question as well as by reading a quote from Thomas Sowell. My question is, how does the failing performance of BPS coincide with the aggressive DEI initiatives of recent years? It's a fair question that I think is worth exploring. Lastly, Sowell's following remarks regarding education seem particularly salient to the situation Boston finds itself in at this time. Schools are quick to blame everyone and everything but themselves for the failures of American education. To them, every bad teacher is the exception and every bad parent is the rule. Parents have been systematically marginalized and discredited by schools across the country, and the current situation of BPS reveals what a mistake that has been. And lastly, I just want to agree with what Lisa Green said. Her comments about sincerely rejecting the receivership necessarily means supporting a fully elected, not hybrid school committee. Thank you very much.
Dolores. Thank you, Dolores. I know I'm going to probably get yelled at because I do let people go on a little bit longer, but I just feel like there's just so many important things that are being said and that I really want to honor. So I'm going to go next to Vassity. You now have the floor, and then I want to know that Natalia and Gina, we're still waiting for you to respond to being promoted to a panelist. And if anyone is looking to speak, make sure that you raise your hand so that we can bring you over to the panelists. If you're still waiting for testimony, that's Maria, Jorge, Stephanie, and Jenna. If you're still here, please make sure you raise your hand so that we can bring you into the panel. Okay, go ahead. Vassity, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and thank you to the council staff and for making this hearing happen today. I'm Vatsiri Sivangsai, the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Education Justice Alliance, also known as MAJA. MAJA collaborates with youth, parents, and educators and community members to protect public education, and we're completely committed to building a sustainable, inclusive, and racially diverse education justice movement. Looking at the state's current accountability system, there is much harm being done to students and their families when using the current and accurate rating system based primarily on Mcas scores. These indicators more align with income than with school performance and falsely stigmatizes schools with predominantly students of color, students from low-income families, and English language learners, including recent immigrants. And these students face the most inequities from cradle to college. And the state's rating system tells them that their schools are failing when it is our society that is failing them. When we look at the current rating system, it reinforces a system of racism that punishes students of color and other students who face inequities rather than providing resources. And now when we look at the state intervention, we see how it also targets districts and schools serving low-income students and students of color. As folks had mentioned, it's top-down, stripping away local and community decision-making. It grabs and takes away student, families, and educators' voices. It silences the voices and everything from parent and student engagement to budgets. It's disruptive, replacing and displacing school leadership, teachers, and staff. It fails our students and schools. There's no way for districts and schools to get out of receivership, for local communities to regain democratic control of their schools. Again, state intervention reinforces a system of racism. A high-quality school is one that provides a sense of belonging to all students, no matter their income or their background, and a place where families and communities can be fully engaged in the decision-making process. It's a place where students have the resources they need to thrive now and a better future. And our students, families, and educators are counting on you to advocate against state takeover of our schools and to work together for a more democratic, accurate, and effective support system. Thank you.
Thank you, Vassity. Thank you for your testimony. I'm going to go now on to Natalia. Then I am going to ask Jorge y después Stephanie, okay? Natalia, you now have the floor.
Great, thanks so much. My name is Natalia Cuadra-Saez. I'm the Director of Organizing at the Boston Teachers Union. And I'm actually here today to read testimony on behalf of two teachers who tried to be here to testify themselves. They were on the list, Seamus Hill and Matt Ruggiero, but because of teaching obligations, they were not able to log on themselves. So I'll start with testimony from Seamus Hill. He's a fourth grade inclusion teacher at the Dever Elementary School. He's been teaching at the Dever for 5 years. And again, the Dever is one of two schools that's currently under state receivership within the Boston Public Schools. He writes, I'm here to testify about the impacts of receivership on teaching and learning conditions, having experienced it firsthand. The Dever was put in receivership in 2014, despite loud protests from students, families, and educators. The school takeover involved dismissing a majority of the staff, replacing them with whiter, less experienced staff. And ever since then, they've had a revolving door of school leaders. Now, 8 years later, the Dever school is full of dedicated staff and curious students who do our best every day to overcome challenges and make the school great. We want you to know that there is more to the Dever than what the labels from the state suggest. But one big problem with state control of a school is the lack of transparency and community voice in how decisions are made. At the Dever, teachers work more hours for less pay than teachers at other Boston public schools. The gap in pay equity lowers staff morale and leads to high staff turnover as educators leave in search of more sustainable employment opportunities. The turnover is noticed by students and families who recognize the disproportionate number of new faces in their schools year to year. We and our colleagues at Upholland, the other BPS school in state receivership, have tried to address this issue with our school leadership, with the school committee, and with the State Board of Education, but we've been met with zero answers, not only about why the pay scale can't be adjusted, but about who even has the authority to make this decision. Yes, there are improvements that our schools desperately need, wraparound services, inclusion done right, modern school buildings, just to name a few. But unfortunately, when the state intervenes, it only leads to lack of transparency, lack of democracy, and lack of stability. So we hope that you as city councilors will support the teachers of the Dever and Upholland in the quest for pay equity, and join us all in calling for resources and stability, not receivership. And I can send along the equal pay letter that was signed by 100% of the staff at the Dever and Up Holland, so you all can see those arguments for yourself. It sounds like I don't have time to read Matt's testimony, so we will email that one along as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Natalia. And yes, please send those testimonies. We can make sure that they are submitted into the record, but you have super succeeded your 2 minutes. But we love you and appreciate you. So moving on next to Jorge, and después Stephanie, and then Maria. And then I believe that is it, unless my staff tells me otherwise. Ahora, Jorge.
Hi, how are you? My name is George Mendoza. I am a resident of Boston. My children all attended the Boston Public School System. And very interesting conversation. I'm a little bit upset that no more was talked about education, and a lot has been said about all sorts of political views and idealism. But I am here in support of the 79% of the population in Boston who voted to have a school committee that is elected by the people. The city has had its chance. We do not want to give this up to the state. And again, people spoke during an election, and elections have consequences. Therefore, we should be granted the opportunity to elect the officials that are going to take part of the school committee in its entirety. We do not need this hearing or meeting or the agenda to be the stepping stone for the city to do a partial appointed and elected school committee. Everybody's had a chance to try. I think that we need to try. We need to let the citizens try for an elected school committee that represents their needs across the city. Education affects everyone. It does not accept. It doesn't discriminate. Bad education hurts us all. So we need to go ahead and move forward and allow the citizens to be represented in the fashion they voted for. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Jorge. I really do appreciate your testimony. I'm moving on next to Stephanie Baños.
Hola, Julia.
Hola, mi amor. ¿Cómo estás?
Muy buenas tardes, concejal Mejía y las demás autoridades. Mi nombre es Stephanie Almanza. Quiero darle gracias por la oportunidad que me están dando esta tarde ahí y querer expresarme. Tengo una hija en BPS que estudia en la escuela Blaston y este es su tercer año en esa escuela. Soy una madre muy involucrada en lo que se llama la educación y el bienestar de mi hija. Primero quiero ir al 2011, cuando llegué a este país, fui a inscribirme para terminar mis estudios. Tuve una experiencia muy buena a pesar de que no sabía inglés y mi papá mucho menos. Ellos nos dieron toda la información que necesitaba y también recuerdo que me dieron unos exámenes para saber cómo yo estaba capacitada para entender el inglés y de ahí asignarme a la escuela adecuada para mí. Viendo ahora el presente, quiero decir que mi experiencia en BPS ha sido igual. Siempre he tenido la información que necesito. Hace poco me mudé y tuve que hacer el cambio de dirección y transportación de mi hija. Todo lo hice por teléfono y email. La atención fue buena, ya que la primera vez la parada era una distancia muy lejana de mi casa, pero volví a comunicarme con ellos y finalmente la parada la tengo frente a mi casa. No hay malas experiencias en mi caso. A mi hija le gusta su escuela, los maestros son maravillosos y no tengo nada en contra que decir. En BPS hemos avanzado mucho, como el acceso al idioma. En estos momentos tenemos interpretación en todas las reuniones del comité escolar en 9 idiomas. Sé que no todo es perfecto, pero pienso que pienso que estamos dando pasos importantes para nuestro distrito escolar. Quiero compartir una experiencia que tuve recientemente a una reunión de DESE. Fui invitada para una reunión como miembro de DINAC, que soy. Para que miembros de DESE escucharan a los padres, esta reunión fue un desastre. La responsable de la reunión no fueron capaces de mantener el control de esta reunión. Estaban los 79 padres. La interpretación era un desastre. Una madre que estuvo conectada tuvo que explicarles a ellos cómo debían de hacer el uso de la interpretación correctamente. Esto es un ejemplo de que DESE no fue capaz de tener el control de esta reunión con 79 padres. ¿Cómo será tener el control de nuestro distrito educativo? Un distrito tan complejo. Basado a lo que acabo de decir, no estoy de acuerdo con la intervención del Estado de la Escuela de Pública de Boston, ya que tenemos un sistema escolar que funciona. Como todo no es perfecto, pero podamos mejorarlo, solo tenemos que unir fuerza. Hemos visto que donde el Estado ha intervenido, los índices académicos no han mejorado. Consistentemente, las relaciones entre los maestros y los estudiantes han empeorado. Así ha sido más difícil tener la relación de muchos maestros con experiencia y conocimiento de las comunidades. Gracias.
Gracias, Stephanie. Un placer de verte. Y yo sé que la persona que va a hacer la interpretación va a hablar ahora, so adelante. Y...
Okay. Thank you for letting me speak. I just want to say that my experience with BPS has been good with respect to transportation and everything. And certain things that I had to do, I did it over the phone in my language. So I just wanted to share that when I went there the first time and I talked to the teachers, I thought that they have access to languages that I was able to speak in my native language. And I know that with what we're doing right now, we're doing a good job because in the Boston School Committee, we have 9 languages that are being represented there. So just want to say that I came here in 2011 from my country and I did not speak English, but I took a test and then they gave me a test to see how my Spanish or English was doing. And then they put me into a grade that it was adequate, and I'm still happy with that. Something that I wanted to share, an experience that I wanted to share with all of you is that I was part of the group of parents that went to a meeting with DESE. And I wanted to tell you that it was a disaster because the person who was in charge of leading or facilitating the meeting didn't know what he was doing. Things got out of control. We were 79 parents that were present there, and the interpretation and translation or language access, they didn't know how it worked. Can you believe that one of the parents had to explain to this person how interpretation works? So how can they say that they can come and take over our districts if they don't understand the complexity of BPS with so many languages? So I do not agree with receivership because right now we have a system that works. It's not perfect, of course. There's a lot of improvement that we need to be doing. And we've seen the data about the academic improvement. There's a lot of work to do that. But if we work harder as a community, as a team, we can see things.
Thank you. Thank you for that translation. I guess I have Maria and Jenna. You have not responded to be promoted to a panelist. You're the last person slated on my list. So Maria, you now have the floor. María, si está disponible y va a hablar, puede hablar ahora, ¿ok, mi amor? María? Is Maria here, María? No. Jenna? Ok. Bueno. Ok, so veo que no hay, I forgot what language I'm speaking. So we're gonna close, seeing that there are no other folks for public testimony. I just wanted to make sure that and I think my colleagues have already left. So at this point, seeing that we don't have any more folks lined up for public testimony, I am going to first thank all of our panelists, all of our public testimony, folks who came on to share their thoughts and expertise and experiences with us. And I keep saying I'm so incredibly encouraged by all the Native speakers that were able to be fully expressed here today. This is the type of leadership that we need to be modeling more, and DESE should learn from us and how we create space for real family and community engagement. And if there's anything that they can learn, is listen to the parents, because they already have the answers, because they're the ones who are living the realities. So with that, just wanted to thank everyone for attending this hearing. As the chair of this, the Education Committee, I'm going to recommend that this order stays in committee. And I've heard loud and clear from those who have testified today that we should be, as a council, filing a resolution and calling for a no to the state receivership. So I'm happy to do that. We did it once, and we were encouraged to have a hearing. So now that we've gone through that process, we're gonna go back at it. But for now, I'm gonna call this hearing to a close, and really do appreciate all of the parents, educators, and administrators who participated today. And without further ado, I'm calling this hearing to a close. Thank you so very much. Have a beautiful